There were suicide bombers in the church waiting to detonate themselves, and they successfully assaulted, killed all of the suicide bombers before they were able to actually detonate. We bombarded the Iraqi army through the underground and these cell phone messages, if you will. Do not follow, those kinds of orders, because we know who you are. So like if you think you're going to follow Saddam's orders to blow up the oil well or launch chemical weapons, his time is done. You have to know that. In Iraq, I'd gotten rocketed and artilleried so many times by the insurgent forces, I unfortunately developed that same skill. And for listeners that may not understand, so like in the movies, older movies, when you hear the whistle, what that is that's the round breaking the sound barrier. How could you possibly, as a special forces team, how could you possibly survive living in a house in a city? To me, that seems like there's no way you would survive. That's a true statement. You wouldn't. My name is Mark Grdovich. I'm a retired Army Special Forces officer, retired from active duty in 2012. Since then, I've worked in some capacity as a contractor or consultant supporting the special operations community. And I wrote Those Who Face Death, the Untold Story of Special Forces in the Iraqi Kurdish Resistance. I started writing it about 3 years ago, and I completed it about 6 months ago and finally published it 3 months ago.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Mark, it's obviously awesome for me to have you on this podcast specifically, having just recently listened through your audiobook, which for everybody out there, and the thing that I've been being stressed by other veterans who have done the same, they've all told me the very first thing you've got to focus on once you've completed your book and done the editing, and you want to never touch that book again for some time, is go ahead and do you have to build that in as part of the book. The book is not done until you do the audiobook.
Totally agree.
And what was your experience with that, real quick? How much more painful or how easy was that for you personally?
Easier than I thought.
Okay.
Because I had some pretty good professional advice. And I had to struggle with decisions like, do I narrate it? Do I pay someone else to narrate it? Everybody told me, no, you have to narrate it. And I'm 100% glad that I did that. I think that was the right thing to do. A little bit nervous ahead of time, like, hey, am I going to sound okay? How am I going to, is it going to be too mechanical sounding if I'm trying to read my own stuff? And I developed a very regimented, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do 2 chapters, a week. Had a whole calendar planned out, and it was easier than I thought. I will say I probably ended up reading each chapter. Like I would read a chapter and be like, I didn't like that. And I'd do it again.
Right.
And it is hard. It is hard to listen to yourself in audio.
Yeah.
But I got better as I went along. It became easier. I learned little tricks, the way I would go into the script and either phonetically write out certain words, like particularly like Arab names or something like that. I put extra spaces in where I knew I needed to cue myself to slow it down, New Yorker. And then when I finished it, I had a guy editing it. I was, and I'm looking back at it now. I'm so happy because I've had a lot of friends, my wife included, who said, "Hey, I love listening to it because it's exactly like you're telling me the story." And I think it does provide a slightly more personal. You're hearing me read it, so I'm actually really proud of the audiobook.
That's awesome, and I 100% agree with you. And I will tell you, I didn't know for sure, and I probably just missed that part of the very beginning that you were going to be the one reading it, and so. I feel bad admitting this, but your book is the first book that I've ever had to slow down to listen to it. Right? I always do audiobooks where I bump it up to about 1.1, 1.15. Yours, I literally had to take it down to
my sister told me the same thing. She's like, I always listen to audiobooks at 1.2, and she's like, I tried that on yours, and I was like, holy smokes. Yeah, I apologize to everybody. That's the New Yorker in me.
Yeah.
I'm reading, I thought I was reading slowly, and I'm still reading a little fast. But at least it gives you an authentic feel.
Absolutely.
And I will also tell you, I've since connected with several other author friends that are either in the process of writing books, and I've given them the advice of, hey, you got to do this, you got to do it this way. Don't be intimidated by it. It's not as hard as you probably think it is before you do it.
Yeah. Again, that was a great experience. And last night I was re-listening, and I once again had to bump it back down. I was like, oh yeah. I'm going to take notes on this, but I have to go back and re-listen to it multiple times.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad to hear you had to slow it down.
Yeah. So let's start out with, as I mentioned on this podcast, the reason for this podcast is, as a new father and a former Ranger and, combat veteran and former Marine Corps, then the Rangers and private contractor, all those things, what I looked at my life and thought is, how can I contribute the most? And I thought back, there was no podcast, there was no Google, there was no way to look up information to find out what a Ranger was. And me, being a weirdo, I, like you had mentioned previously in our conversations that we'll bring up, that camaraderie that you sought was the same thing that I sought. Now, I didn't know it was that word, and I didn't know what it was that I needed, but I knew that I needed a challenge to push myself. And I took the leap, and I went after the hardest thing that I could possibly do and still be in the reserves, because in 1999, there was never going to be a war. We had taken out Saddam in 72 hours, I remember as a kid on watching TV. So I just thought, what is the hardest thing I could possibly find? Marine infantry heavy weapons specialist in the Marine Corps and a reserve station in Oklahoma where I lived. So that's what I jumped on. 9/11 happened. I reenlisted because my unit wasn't going to deploy, and I didn't want the war to be over by the time I got there. So I reenlisted for the Ranger Regiment. And I've already told this, but I will have to tell this a million times. I did not know what a Ranger was, and I had no idea what I was going to be doing as a Ranger Forward Observer until I was wearing a tan beret. And even then, we got the end of the night, right before graduation, they let you ask them about your job. And I raised my hand and I asked him, there was only 2 of us in the class. I said, what does a forward observer do in the Ranger Regiment? Everything I learned was artillery. We're not using artillery. What do we do? He's like, oh, you're going to love it, man. You're going to be calling in airstrikes from Spectre gunships, from AC-130 gunships, from Little Birds, jets. You're going to be doing cool stuff. Don't worry about it. Sit down. Shut up. And so that was it. That's all I know. And when I got there, it was a rude awakening because I hadn't been through the hazing and the difficulties but having overcome that, if I got to live my life over again, I would still do the same thing. I would still wear that tan beret.
Yeah,
I would go through the adversity because the brotherhood, and that's where I want to get it back to. The future in our nation of special forces, the future Rangers, the future Marines, the future, you name it, they're going to have access to these types of podcasts. There's going to be a future SF soldier out there who has heard this podcast and this inspired them. Did you have any experience like that growing up, or what made you want to be special forces?
You and I have shared some of this story before, but I was saying my first exposure to special forces, which I knew nothing about. I was somewhat interested in the Army. My grandfather was an old Navy veteran from World War I and World War II. So I had a real affinity for the military. But at 15 years old, I was like all 15 years old. I didn't know what I was doing. I was, somewhat confused. And I ended up reading a book by a guy named J.C. Pollock called Mission MIA. It was about guys who go back to Vietnam to rescue, POW friends of theirs. It's a great book. But that book just really spoke to me and moved me because it described this relationship, this tight brotherhood between these 6 individuals, and that their characters, and they were all based on real SF guys. J.C. Pollock did a lot of research for the book. It resonated with me, the way he described them, the way they interacted, the way they were proactive. They were not bystanders in their life. They were, action guys, if you will. So at 15 or 16 years old, I was like, this is what I want to do. Now, also, like most 16-year-olds, like, I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if I could do this, but I was attracted to it. And then, as I said, when I was 18, 19, 20, somewhere in there, it triggered me to be like, okay, I'm going to give it a try. I made that scary decision. And going back to, I certainly do hope there's somebody listening right now, guy or gal, that is intrigued by maybe something we say, some story that resonates with them. And maybe they think, I don't know if I could do that. Okay. All right. That's fine. Hang on to that, and maybe you'll, after thinking about it for a year or two, you'll change. And then maybe in 10 or 20 years, you're going to look back and go, yeah, I was listening to this podcast with these 2 old guys and they were telling stories. And that's what first made me think, maybe that's something I could do. I certainly hope it inspires somebody like that.
Awesome. And yeah, that's the mission with this podcast. And there's so many young men right now that are struggling in our nation. And so many of them need a place, a direction to go, and a purpose. And that's the one thing that I will say. If you're struggling with that, as I was at that age, I knew that if I raised my hand and I went into the military, if I just gave it everything I had, and this is from the books that I had read, which were old Navy SEAL books and some LERPs books and those types of things from Vietnam, I just knew that, and it proved true. In my experience, if you are the type that's just going to kill yourself on PT and get better at it every day, and you're just out there running the obstacle course in the rain by yourself, if you're allowed to, which we were, that will be seen, that will be picked up, and those types of people will be nudged in the right direction. You don't have to have a Special Forces contract, a Ranger contract. Funny story, I actually, when I was re-enlisting, I tried to do the 18 X-ray program. I was the first person to sign the 18 X-ray out of Oklahoma, the Oklahoma MEPS, because at the beginning, 9/11, I went in to try and re-enlist, or I tried to go active duty. The Marines were like, shut up, sit down, you'll deploy in a couple years. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to work for me. So I started looking into all of the programs, and I thought, I suck at swimming. So I'm SEALs out. I'd never heard of a PJ, still hadn't, even when I was in the Rangers for a little while. And I knew Special Forces. I knew a Green Beret was this tough, right? Rambo, what I grew up with. I went ahead and signed the contract, and then they're like, oh, everything's great. We need prior service guys. You're a reservist. We can flip you over to active duty Army. No problem. You have to take the D-Lab. I'm like, what's that? I'm like, defensive language aptitude battery. You have to go in and listen to a fake language that doesn't exist on a recording tape from the 1950s.
That allegedly determines your ability to learn
foreign language.
Difficulties of languages.
The girl that went in before me to take it to become a linguist, and she has 2 other fluent languages she spoke. She just graduated with her bachelor's degree in foreign language. She failed the D-Lab right in front of me.
That's why I say allegedly.
Yeah. And so I was like, if you failed, I have no shot at it. So I did the A, B, C, C, B, A, C. And that I failed, obviously.
Didn't work for you.
Yeah. And so they were like, hey, you have to sign a contract. I was like, I know my rights. I'm not signing anything until you give me something that's harder than a Marine. You give me something that is equal to or more difficult than what I am right now, then I'm going to sign it. And that's where he's like, hey, I got a forward observer contract. You're probably not interested. I was like, I didn't even know there were forward observers in the Ranger Regiment. That's how I ended up becoming what I am. And the reason why I bring all that up on a podcast with you, where I want to hear your story, is I had no idea what I was going to do. And I just knew that if I tried really hard and I took that leap, that I would be the only one that would decide whether or not I succeeded or failed, because I will keep trying until I die or until I'm forced out. And that was my experience. And that's what I always recommend to young men struggling for direction.
And I think, like your experience is very different than mine, but it's actually very similar. The military is largely a relatively screwed up organization. And I say that's just a reality. It is.
Right. It's made up of people.
Yeah. And every other organization is screwed up too. Yeah. All organizations, are messed up in some ways. But I have no regrets. I love my military experience. It's an adventure that you are navigating, and you have to make decisions like, do you want to accept forward observer? Do you want to try to be an 18 X-ray? Do you want to volunteer for this? And it's hard because some of the stuff doesn't work out. I mean, I think the path most veterans would look back on their careers, not what you expected on the front end of it. Because also you don't know anything when you're volunteering or signing up. You're assuming, hoping. And some of it's going to go right and some of it's going to go wrong. But I'm fortunate to say in my 23 plus year career, just like you said, I would not really change anything. I'm very happy with the experiences and memories I have. Very fortunate the way it played out. But it's a great experience. And I hope that inspires somebody to maybe consider maybe that's a path for them in the future. Awesome.
So let's jump right in. Very first, I have to greet you as Cock Mark.
Oh yeah, thanks. That's worthy of some explanation.
if you don't mind, share with us your experience with
jumping right into it. You're just getting right into it. So in the context of this story, that's about a specific special operation. It's about a whole mission. We found out we were going to work with the Kurdish forces that are referred to as Peshmergas. That's the term for their guerrillas. And the organization had a little bit of experience with them, but it wasn't our habitual area. Like, we were really supposed to be focused on Europe, but because of the war and people were shifting around, suddenly we're told the Middle East is now our area, Iraq is our area. So we're preparing for it.
Give us a date. What
I'm sorry, 2002.
Okay.
So 9/11, 2001 is pretty close still in the rearview mirror. Like it's still emotionally right there. Afghanistan has not been going on very long. The new fighting in Afghanistan, it's going on maybe about 11, 12 months. And now we're starting to talk about, hey, it looks like we might be conducting an invasion of Iraq. So in the quick research of, okay, so what are we looking at doing, or what's our mission, or what's the scenario, we're finally going to work with the Kurds. And we also find out in Kurdish, the term of endearment, like you would say sir, like, or in Arabic it's Sadie, in Kurdish it's kak. And yeah, see, just like that, we're like little high school kids when we first heard that. We're like, are they messing with us? Is that a joke?
Right.
But once we got on the ground and like literally after 24 hours and got past that, it became, routine. Like I was Cock Mark, the battalion commander was Cock Ken, and you actually did hear it as a term of endearment, and not, like a high school kid laughing, like he just said a funny word.
And that's spelled K-O-K.
Yeah.
Okay. So just
there might be a silent H in there, like K-O-H-K.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
With the right hand over your heart was the greeting custom.
Yeah. No, the hand thing is another big issue.
Similar to the salute.
It's based on a salute. It's also based on the way like adult males in this country might shake hands if you meet someone. There, when males cross paths with each other, the part of that gesture of hello, or greeting, or respect is to go like this. And it's kind of funny because we all got indoctrinated to that so quick, because you can feel the real emotion when you see a guy doing that to you. They're glad that Americans are here. Like, oh, sir. And we all started doing it just instinctively. And it really resonated with us, like, hey, we're actually starting to really adopt these practices.
Awesome. So that took a little bit of getting used to, but I also bring that out because, right, the miscommunication is something that is a common thread throughout the book.
There's a little bit of that.
There's times in which, and we'll get into that, where, information through Psyops is putting out information, and it ended up twisting it, and it comes out backwards. And so one of the things that everybody has to be prepared for, and something that you mention, is the strength of the Special Forces Green Berets specifically, is the ability to think, the ability to overcome, to think on your feet, so to speak, and to just overcome whatever that is. And whether it's now we're cock in front of everybody's neck, okay, we're going to roll with it, and you couldn't do that in the Ranger Regiment. There would be so much laughter, and it would never end, and it's just that professionalism has to be there, though, and you've got to roll with it.
Pardon me, sarcastic, but that's just because we're just a much more mature force than the Rangers. Yeah.
Right.
You'd asked me a question previously. It was in some of your notes, like, hey, just for the listeners to describe a little bit of the unique distinction between some of the soft components. We're all part of the same family loosely, but we're all slightly different. We all have our own unique organizational cultures and strengths, not really weaknesses, but different strengths that we can play to. The Rangers, I have a lot of love for the Ranger Regiment. I think they're an incredible organization. I could actually go on and be like, hey, the Ranger Regiment has been the insurance policy for the United States military for the last 50, 60, 70 years. They've come through for us. If there are Rangers in the mix, whatever they're doing is going to be done correctly for the most part.
Yeah.
And I will describe it as, hey, the Rangers are the greatest infantry in the world. If you need something broken, destroyed, or captured, they're your force, bar none. Doesn't matter how hard it is. They will give it the best possible try if it can be done. And that's amazing. They're incredible in that regard. Navy SEALs are maritime aquatic brothers. Definitely a unique culture, slightly different. Great guys. I have tons of friends who are SEALs now. And if there's something to do with the water, they're your guys. Yeah. They are your guys. And most of the world is accessible by water, so that's actually a good thing, and that makes a lot of sense. So where does Special Forces come into that? Special Forces, they are trained and, selected and trained and educated on a slightly different type of career track, where they're selected for guys who are more comfortable operating in small elements, more comfortable operating without massive resources and support, which sounds weird to say, but like they're kind of trained to get used to you're sort of on your own. Because theoretically, going back to World War II, they're supposed to be able to operate in, if not enemy lines, very remote locations where there is not lines of communication, supplies, and logistics. And that's mentally hard. That will freak some people out if they're not accustomed to it. So again, the Rangers wouldn't operate that way, but that's just the way they're designed. Where a Special Forces team might be by themselves, alone and unafraid, as we like to say, in the mountains. But they also have unique skills, like we have our own kind of medics that are super medics. We have our own weapons guys, our own engineers who can build pretty much anything, our own commo guys. So we're designed to be semi-self-sufficient. And if somebody were to glance at that, it's a bit weird. But so subsequently, the guys end up getting raised, being comfortable, one, not having all the most beautiful support in the world. They'll figure it out. They're comfortable, like, just go figure it out.
Yep.
They're also thinkers. By default, they are constantly analyzing and thinking. So, where I might say the Rangers, they can stake themselves on, hey, lethality. They are the most lethal force in the world. Not to say special forces isn't lethal, but that's not something that we're going to try to be like, we're as lethal or more lethal than them. We are the, if I always like the phrase, man is a reed, but he's a thinking reed. We are the thinking force that can figure out how to solve problems that seemingly seem unsolvable. And I know you liked, I said something once about having been a former instructor twice in the Special Forces course. We put guys through a lot of really weird dilemmas. And we know they're weird and we know they're hard and it seems like there's no solution. And one of the things I used to try to explain to people is, don't modulate your effort based on your estimation of how successful this is going to be. Because just like things tend to turn bad quickly, they turn to tend good quickly too. Without a long ramp that you're seeing it's getting better 10% every day. So if it looks like it's going bad or badly, give it 100%. And then suddenly when it's, when you've turned that corner and success is right there, you won't know it until it's right there. So we train guys to keep your mind thinking that way. Don't gauge your effort on, I don't think this is going to work. I'm not going to really try. Or I think it is going to work, so I'm taking it seriously. Always take it seriously. Do the best you can. And subsequently, and you see it in this story, there's plenty of crazy obstacles we face that looking back on it now, I'd be like, there's no way this is going to work. But we were able to work through, those obstacles and get to a successful outcome.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's something that, as you bring that up, my thought was make it happen. You guys are the make it happen guys. The MacGyver moment is every moment of every day for you guys. That is one of the things that I, again, kind of reading LERPs and reading about what Special Forces is doing, and this is where the force multiplier. That's what I heard most of the time while I was in, and a lot of our guys ended up going to Special Forces. Whenever you're getting to the end of your enlistment as a Ranger, you're either going to stay in the Ranger Regiment, you're going to go to Special Forces, you're going to go to try out for Delta, you're going to go try out for other units that recruit from Delta, or you're going to go at that moment where Blackwater and Triple Canopy were first formed and around. Everybody was going to Triple Canopy. Like, we lost our command sergeant major to Triple Canopy. Like, a lot of dudes were going.
Well, it's funny because the life as a Ranger and life as a Green Beret are so different. And a lot of guys are attracted to, I want to try something different. I want to go experience something as professional, but completely different. And like in the Special Forces community, I don't know what it is, how many of our guys are former Ranger Regiment guys. I'll say somewhere between 10 and 20%. Those guys are critical to us. Those guys bring critical personality and skill sets because they're such great soldiers. Now they're going to operate, they're going to demonstrate their mental flexibility and operate different than when they were in the Rangers. But having a mix of Rangers sprinkled in goes back to my comment about the insurance policy. Like, if I've got Rangers in the mix, I know that the standards will still be maintained. I know they'll do things right. Like, you can just count on a Ranger when I'm not watching, he will still do it the right way.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because one of the things I've never brought up on a podcast. So as a Marine, I became so discipline focused. I was like a robot. And so in the Ranger Regiment, when I first got in, one of my sergeants ended up like labeling me the robot, because I would just sit there just sit there with my hands, my just like in Marine Corps boot camp, your ankles near you, your hands on your, and I would just be sitting there waiting for whatever it is that's next, while everybody else is chilling and just kind of hanging out, and then I'm just doing push-ups, or I'm doing something to make myself better and occupy my time. And whereas once I left the Marine Corps, I stayed that way. My brain set was focused, ultra disciplined, and then when I got into the Rangers, I still had to be disciplined, but it was a disciplined, but we break the rules when we need to, and we have to make things happen as quickly. You have to make a decision and go with it as quickly and violently as you need to get it done.
Yeah.
That was my experience. I lost some of the discipline, and really it transitioned over to, I don't care about the rules as much as I want to get this done. And that's where my wife and I now butt heads, because she was a Marine.
Yeah.
So,
well, actually, an interesting point about discipline, because I think this is an interesting example. Because I've had people, do the debate of, hey, who's better? Who's better, Rangers or Special Forces? And like, what a great question. What's better, apples or hammers? It's two things that. What do you mean? What's better at what? And the discipline requirement is there for both of them, but it's different. So like a young Ranger, is in a Ranger unit, and he has to do hard stuff. He's going to be asked to do ridiculous feats, go climb that cliff, things like that. But he also has a guy in his left, right, front, and rear, sort of keeping that discipline in check. In Special Forces now, you're going to get a different scenario where let's take that guy on the left, right, and front and rear out of there, and it's just you. Are you still going to perform the same task to the same degree of discipline? And you need to. And I say that, for individuals that have never had the luxury of, oh my gosh, it's just me. Because like as a young infantryman, if you do it wrong, the disciplined guys on your left and right will fix you. And subsequently you learn not to do it wrong. But what if there was no check there? Would you still do it right? Or would you, I sometimes refer to it as taking the sides off a swimming pool and hoping the water stays there. Would you fall apart? And I have seen examples, in both forces actually, where it didn't work. That individual failed us and fell apart. But that's actually almost the requirement that's unique in Special Forces. Hey, look, you're going to go operate someplace where there's no other left and right checks on you. It's 100% on you to still do it the right way when no one's looking. And for the most part, guys do that. That's truly the challenge. Because if there's some little thing in your mind that's like, well, now that it's war, now that I'm going to the the real world operations, I can suddenly throw all the things out the window. We try to discourage guys from thinking that way. Like, hey, we do these things not because we're being watched, but because we're professionals.
Right. Now, I want to get to. I'm going to jump into one question real quick, and this one's going to be hard for me to really get it out as precise as I want to. In Robin Sage, you guys have to, in Special Forces, you have to, at some point, from my experience of reading books about it and hearing people's stories, there's a point to where you're going to have to negotiate with a, resistance, guerrilla, terrorist, whoever it is, who is causing harm or doing violence or even killing members of, essentially doing an atrocity. And you now have to interact with this person and convince them that you're not going to help them. Now, in your book, one of the stories, you're in that position in real life to where you're dealing with this, and I want to know, did Robin Sage flash back in your brain at all? What's going through your brain in that moment where you're standing in front of this guy talking to him? Yeah,
you're talking about Captain Pat Becker's ODA Commander 075 talking to his counterpart. All of us were stunned at how, we all have a great memory and affection for that thing called Robin Sage, which is the culmination exercise in the Special Forces course. And we're like, yeah, it was really good exercise. I learned a lot, but we don't expect it's going to be exactly like that. This was exactly like that. I mean, it was ridiculous how exact it was. And in Robin Sage, though, truth be told, in some ways, it was harder because the Kurds, for the most part, were great partners. They're good fighters. They're just good people. They were fun to work with. In Robin Sage, you don't get that. You get problem children. You get a counterpart we need to work with who's inclined to, there's 10,000 scenarios you could put on a guy. He's working with the black market. He's doing some illicit drug trade. He's committing some degree of human rights violations or not, and then you have, as the American, you have to deal with this to try to get to a good outcome. And like, again, as the American, it's not a black and white, completely right or completely wrong answer. There's a spectrum of, are you going to cower to this guy because you want it to succeed so bad? You're going to be conflict avoidant and not tell him what he's doing is, one, maybe it's morally and ethically wrong or illegal, but it's also not operationally good. Are you going to just look the other way because I just want to keep rapport with this guy? Or are you going to challenge him? Are you going to challenge him in a way that destroys the relationship? Or are you going to challenge him in a way that finds some negotiated I need you to stop doing that with your guys because it's not to our benefit. And he's going to say, no, you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. So like in the individual I'm talking about, Captain Pat Becker's, he handled it beautifully. And there were other team leaders had similar challenges like that. I think all of us look back to, oh man, I can't believe how much this is like 5 years ago, 10 years ago for me in the Special Forces course, when I don't even think as a student, I don't think I appreciated it as much how valuable some of these weird scenarios they were putting me, I think I wanted to do more shooting. Like I wish we shot more, but we did more human role-playing interaction that in hindsight, looking back, 10, 20 years, was way more valuable than just shooting.
Absolutely. And so in that, what was the outcome? So they are kind of walk through that scenario because they don't necessarily haven't read the book yet.
Yeah. So
what was it that actually happened there?
So first, before I explain the scenario, one thing that's also very important to point out, because a lot of people with military experience now will say, oh, I've worked with foreign counterparts, or I've worked with, I'm going to use the term like sort of unusual partners, like maybe, for example, Iraqi military forces or Afghani military forces. Guerrillas is a different category, of irregular forces. They don't have the benefit of a regular military structure of what we would call UCMJ. So they have to live a different lifestyle that's a little bit more challenging. So in this particular case, they had captured some Iraqi prisoners. The Iraqi soldiers, prisoners, were over there. Captain Beckers was over here with his team, and I think he had just talked to his Kurdish commander counterpart, and then he heard shots ring out, and he ran back over there to find out they have just shot all the prisoners. And I don't remember how many it was, like say it was like 5 or 10 prisoners. And he immediately expressed, somewhat probably toned down outrage, like this is unacceptable. And the Kurdish guy quickly explained to him, you don't understand how it is here. This is how it is. And this is it. This is, action, go, Special Forces captain, you're on. And he has a decision to make. How do I handle this? I can say, hey, this is unacceptable. We're pulling out. We're ending our mission. And a lot of people would look at that and go, that was a good decision. That wasn't an inappropriate choice. It's a choice. It doesn't really benefit us, but it's a legitimate choice. The other end of that spectrum would be, okay, he's right. I got to keep this together. I'm not going to say anything. Also a choice, not a good choice, because they're going to kill more prisoners tomorrow or the next day or something like that. So he made a decision to show the operational futility of what the guy was doing. And he said, you're so worried about keeping American support, because they were also like trying to prevent the Americans from getting too close to enemy fire. Like they actually kept holding them back because they had instructions. If an American gets killed, we can't trust the Americans. Maybe they'll all pull out. And in his case, all the team leaders were doing the same thing, kept stressing, you've got to let me go with you all the way to the front lines. You've got to let me stay with you in the firefight or whatever we're doing. So he said to him, you're so concerned about losing American support. I have to be honest with you. If anyone finds out that you're killing prisoners, that will end American support faster than any of us getting killed. And that resonated with the guy. So he was able to take corrective action, if you will, to get this guy on a more moral and legal footing, which is important to us to sustain our support, but also it is operationally more beneficial. And I think he might also said something like, hey, and we're here now, so we can talk to these prisoners, interrogate them, get information, more intelligence. You can't do this. And I think at the time, I kind of remember which commander it was. I think the commander was skeptical, but reluctantly, I'm going to agree with what you said because, I have to meet you halfway. And he was able to get them to stop that unacceptable behavior, for the rest of the campaign, as far as we know, at least. So that's an example of it's not as simple as black and white. You have to really apply some savviness here and some smarts and continue to navigate the situation. And he did a fantastic job.
Absolutely. And that made me think, especially as we had just previously talked about the difference between how the Special Forces soldier would do that versus the Ranger and the Hammer, right?
Yeah.
So in my mind, when I read that, I thought, if I were in that position in the Ranger Regiment, what would I have done? Especially once I moved up corporal, I'm in a team leader role. I'm not telling you this as a way to say that this is how all Rangers are. However, my initial thought is I've got to physically stop him from doing that. So probably I would grab him by the throat, put my gun in his face, and throw him on the ground and let him know that he can't do that anymore or he's dead.
Yeah.
And that's where, like you just said, you have to not tell him no, and you don't threaten him. Instead, you teach him why this is beneficial for him.
Well, and to make sure I paint the full scenario, because I do, acknowledge and respect that particular choice of response. He's got like 500 guys with him. Like, I want to point that out.
Right, absolutely. And still, that's exactly what my
But so there's another teaching point to this that's actually really valuable. And I'm going back to my time as an instructor and knowing history, knowing other campaign experiences. And I knew this as an instructor. So in the United States Special Forces, when we were operating in El Salvador in the early 1990s or late 1980s, early 1990s, supporting the El Salvadorian military in their counterinsurgency efforts. Kind of an interesting, not particularly well-known period. And if somebody were to glance at that effort, they would not be wrong to say, hey, the El Salvadorian military at that time had a lot of human rights violations. Totally true statement. And somebody also could criticize that, so are our advisors still working with guys that are committing human rights violations? And the answer to that question is absolutely. And it's totally logical that someone would say that's unacceptable. We shouldn't be working with them. And I'm not trying to make light of it like, well, that's what we got to do. We are continuing to engage to change their behavior. And the coolest thing about the El Salvadorian example is when the conflict largely ended in 1992, and it sort of ended like, let's say, with a sort of a ceasefire. The insurgents or guerrillas came out of the mountains and arguably gave up. They've been fighting for like 10 years and they just gave up. Also because the military had been getting more proficient over the years. But when they interviewed the guerrillas and said, why did you guys choose to give up? The singular thing that made them choose to give up is they said, because the government stopped committing human rights violations. So now let that sink in for a second. Arguably, the government of El Salvador won that conflict. The fighting insurgents gave up. But who actually won? Because arguably the insurgents did eventually do something that forced the government to reinvent themselves and change their behavior. And we had a hand in that over a 10-year period. So if you only look at things in a snapshot of one day, you can make short-term decisions. But hopefully, you're looking more long-term and you're seeing the benefit of, it might seem like what I'm doing today is something we shouldn't be doing. If we disengage, we'll never get the long-term benefit of it. And in that case, El Salvador today is still a very good South American partner. And we were able to get to a favorable outcome, if you will.
And I notice in your language there, and this is constant throughout your book, a favorable outcome is kind of a common theme. And like you talk about, it's the strategy that's at the forefront of your brain as you're making decisions and as you're deciding how to react to crazy situations that you're in.
Yeah, I mean, and the larger context of this story, and to your question too, is always keeping in mind, at least my job is, I was the operations officer for the battalion. So I'm largely responsible for the plan, if you will, and also the execution of the plan. What are we doing this for? Like, what's our intended outcome? What's our objective? And keeping that in mind so that when weird things happen and things fall apart or things change, I can continue to make additional adjustments that still lead us to that objective. And that's at the heart of all military planning, is to be able to adjust because you have a clear picture of, you haven't memorized a plan and you're rigidly doing it. You have a clear picture of what we're trying to get to. And I'll speak Ranger for a second. You got lost, you were off azimuth, and now you can correct because you know where you're supposed to go.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was just thinking. Triangulate your position and reshoot your azimuth. So one thing that I wanted to definitely bring up, and this one, I would say, you tell a lot of crazy stories, and there's several, I say crazy stories, you tell a lot of
crazy,
very intriguing stories that are, keep you on the edge of your seat. The one story, though, that immediately gave me goosebumps and brought a feeling to me that really brought me back to that moment was one section that you say that kind of galvanizes your entire story is you're seeing a Kurdish man holding a child with tears in his eyes. Mm-hmm. And you guys are driving through, but you're in Peshmerga outfits, but you pull a Velcro flag, American flag off, and you hold it to the windshield in solidarity. And all these people erupt in cheering and celebration. And this is the one thing that I have to drive home to people that watch the news and watch CNN and MSNBC lie. They didn't do anything else. It's an absolute lie that they faked that we were these invaders that everybody there hated. The closest I've ever felt to a rock star was the day I drove into Baghdad the first time after the invasion, because as we drove across the desert in our dune buggy vehicles, and I'm on the 50 cal on top, and we have no armor whatsoever, and we never had armor on any of our vehicles. We were literally driving by crowds of people standing in lines for, not like in one line for a mile, but over the miles as we got closer. You see the oil rigs on fire, the oil shooting up, and it's all in flames. And I'm like, okay, here we go. We're about to go into it. And instead we're met with people with little American flags, which you guys helped with. And
we'll talk about that.
And they're celebrating us as not as these conquerors, which is another huge mistake that was made, which was we don't want to be seen as the invaders and the conquerors, and so we're not going to say that we're in charge. We're wanting to make sure that we don't put ourselves in that position, and that caused chaos and essentially like a 24-hour period of purge that, and we'll get into that as well, but tell me what that was like in that moment of you seeing this man.
And the story you're describing is actually one of my favorite events. So to put in context, so our mission was to create a second front in support of the invasion. For whatever reasons, it's an interesting question or story. The United States chose to invade with a smaller invasion force than I think we've ever done in any conflict ever. Like we went in with 7 divisions, which is, for military people, that's uncanny how ridiculously small that is. So the notion of a second front to draw away as many of the Iraqi forces from where the invasion is going to take place is super critical. And there's a lot to it. Like, we don't know when the invasion is, so we don't know how much time we have to accomplish this. And there's other complications that make this more challenging. But so when I finally get into country several weeks before the invasion starts, it's a secret mission.
So what time frame is this? What month?
Early March of 2003. Yeah, the invasion starts, I want to say, on 21st of March. So we're driving around. I'm dressed like a Kurd, trying to keep our profile very, very low key. Many of the things we have promised have fallen through. I'm sure you recall, Turkey changed their position, so our main force can no longer infiltrate into Iraq from Turkey. This is a problem. All of our equipment is in Turkey. So even if we could figure out how to infiltrate, we don't have any of our equipment. This also means that close air support will not be available from Turkey. That's problematic. We promised the Kurdish fighters we would bring in money for them to pay their fighters and lethal aid equipment. Didn't materialize. So here I am on the ground. All of our promises have fallen through. And, at that time, rightly so, the U.S. had somewhat of a reputation of you can't really rely on the United States. We had historically betrayed the Kurds 3 times in the previous 20 years, once in, I want to say, 73, then in 91, and then in 96. So they were familiar with our promises and then how suddenly the promises fell apart. So here I am on the ground, the representative now with a handful of other Americans, there's probably about 40 of us total in country. And we just feel terrible because this particular Kurdish faction has committed to this. There's kind of no going back. And if in fact, and honestly, we as the United States, we don't know if, General Colin Powell was on TV talking to the UN. He made some comment to the effect of Saddam has one more chance. And that's a funny comment because literally I jokingly refer to like all the resistance members throughout the country that had like weapons hidden under the floorboards of their house. We're taking them out. And then suddenly he says, Saddam has one more chance. And they go right back under the floorboards. People like, we've been here before. We all rise up. We all get slaughtered. I'm not rising. So like the will to resist started to wane. People were getting really nervous that, oh my God, the U.S. is going to leave us again. So I felt really, really bad. We were driving around and we were in this small Kurdish town. I was in an intersection. I was in a Kurdish car. And the locals could tell those are not normal cars. They weren't like our cars, but they knew like those are Kurdish VIPs. And there was a guy with his daughter, and he's as close as you, like he's where you are, and there's a car window between us. And he's looking right at me. And I just made a decision that I was so disgusted. I was really viscerally angry that we are failing these people because my entire desire was to correct the mistakes we made in 96. Like I felt like this is a second chance. So I reached into my vest. I pulled out a Velcro American flag. I used to have a larger size American flag. Like it was a sort of a reminiscent of World War II flag, not the small ones that they currently wear. And I pressed it up against the window. And as soon as I did that, he put his hand over his mouth, started crying. They started to clap and cheer, and they were like, there are really Americans here. I've now seen an American flag. It's for real. And we drove off. And I was like, okay, I know I just assumed a little bit of risk exposing ourselves, but to me, it was an acceptable risk to demonstrate there's something to this. It's for real, and yeah, that was a big moment for me. I will say, I'm going to push back a little bit because, my friends from CNN, we actually had a CNN journalist embedded with us, Jim Scudo, who was great, fantastic. And I've got a couple other good journalist friends that were on the ground with us. People will get upset about the media one way or the other, but like I have a tremendous amount of respect for the war correspondent journalists that put themselves in tremendous danger to report, good and or bad. And I'm very grateful for the ones that I saw on the ground, some from the New York Times, some from the Washington Post. I'm thinking of actual individuals, good folks. And I really respect them trying to get the story. Even if there's a little part at times, maybe we disagreed about that, still have a lot of professional respect for them for what they do.
I understand what you're saying, and I can respect that. I didn't know any of those people.
Yeah, I get that.
All I got was the blowback from the spin that they would put on things. And I'm not talking about because all the missions we were going on, either the credit goes to regular Army unit somewhere or the Navy SEALs when that started. Like I remember when, now our missions successful are being mentioned as a Navy SEAL successful mission. And I thought that was strange. And then we fast forward to Osama bin Laden being taken out. And now we're literally saying SEAL Team 6 exists. They're called DevGru. Here's the guys. And all of that kind of blew me away. But in my experience, just from 02 to 05, when I was in and during those crazy times, kind of the wild, wild west of the initial war, both in Afghanistan and Iraq, it was so frustrating for us to go out and experience something and then get to base and see that they're literally have a little tiny group of people behind them and they're pretending like there's this huge riot of people, and that's the specific instance I mentioned.
Well, and one of the jumping a little bit out of order, but it's good for the stories. So when we captured the city of Kirkuk, which is a major city, 600,000 people, a major hub of the oil infrastructure in the north, which makes it very important to Saddam. It's the first city in the north captured. It's the only city captured 100% by indigenous, guerrilla forces or resistance forces. When we took the city and we rolled in, and there's, the book I think captures, it's a great story because it's pretty crazy how we pulled that off. We pulled it off with very few people. Once we rolled in, we realized, hey, there's not enough of us here. Like if the Iraqis ever figure this out, they might change their mind and come back into the city. So if you recall in the book, there's a story where we're all dressed like Kurds, and we all agreed like, hey, today's the day we need to shave off our mustaches and put on our traditional American desert uniforms. So we did that. And the day we did it, my Kurdish counterparts had never seen me without a mustache, which would be the equivalent of if you went to high school and shaved your head, all your high school friends would laugh at your shaved head. They thought it was hilarious that I had no mustache. Like they were literally making fun of me. It was very, very grade school bullying like.
That's awesome.
But so here I am, I'm dressed like an American soldier. I've got an American flag on my sleeve, desert uniforms. And we had a whole thing where me and a couple of the NCOs would drive around the city now, and we'd go to intersections and we'd see media, we'd see news, and we'd be like, okay, let's do the thing. And they would shout to me like, hey, put this stuff in the truck. And the news people would hear Americans talking and they'd come running over like they got us, and we would act like, oh crap, you got us. And they would start interrogating us, and we would give them everything they wanted to hear. They're like, who are you guys? We're like, we're the paratrooper brigade. Where are you? We're like, there's 3,000 of us. Total, none of this is true.
Right.
And they're like, and they would say, where are you? And we're like, where'd you just come from? And they're like, we were at the governor's palace. We're like, we're at the airfield. If they came from the airfield, we're like, we're all at the governor's palace. So we created this, I'm going to say lie, that we sustained for about 72 hours, that everyone in the city knew there were 5,000 American paratroopers in the city. No one had actually seen them in mass, but everybody had secondhand knowledge of this. And we did leverage the media to help us with that story. I told my guys, we literally drove around the city. We sectored the city up like every team had a neighborhood, if you will. And I said, hey, your mission today is to make sure every local in this city sees an American in uniform. They need to all know we are for real here. And as we were doing that, we were also speaking to the coalition forces saying, we got to get more forces up here, because at some point someone's going to figure out they've never seen more than 30 Americans in one place.
Right.
But that was pretty successful. But the media helped us a lot with that, and I appreciate that.
Much like the SEAL Team 6, even though there's not 6 teams.
Well, and and you also mentioned the American flags.
Yes.
As we were driving into the city, and it is a useful point of history, because we were welcomed in Kirkuk as liberators. From my historic knowledge, it looked exactly like everything I've ever seen of rolling into Paris or rolling into Antwerp. Like, the streets were packed with people that I'm shouting, "Get out of my way." We're driving at 3 miles an hour, and the car is literally pushing them, and they're all just cheering. They're having a great time. So as we're doing this, we're trying to make our way. We're all saying we're going to rally up at the governor's palace, because our forces that attacked the city attacked it from like 4 different sides. And, so we haven't seen each other. Like, the guys who attacked in the north are now driving south, and I'm coming from the east, and there's somebody coming from the south, and we're all going to meet in the center of the city. And as we're in this jammed up intersection with, I'm going to say 10,000 civilians, one of my CIA counterparts jumps out of his vehicle, and he's got a box with him. And he says, "Hey, come on." And he grabs me, and he reaches in his box and pulls out a handful of small U.S. parade type flags. And we just start passing them out to every intersection, or everybody at the intersection. And we do that. We jump back in the vehicle, go to the next intersection, do it again. And it creates this optic where every place you drive, you see literally thousands of people waving U.S. flags. And it really did create this, like, this is liberation. And it also then supported, there must be tons of Americans here, because I'm seeing thousands of American flags that I don't know where they came from.
Right. And that's something that I was really, you guys working with Psyops. I think that's one of the stories of the Iraq invasion that really, to me, I always want to know what were these little things that were put into place that really helped drive that narrative that America can accomplish this. We can liberate you. It's not just about killing Saddam and Uday and Qusay. It really is about turning this over to you guys being able to vote for your own leaders. Like, I think that's one of the stories that needs to be told. And I'm really fascinated with what was your experience working specifically with Psyops during this time?
It's a great topic. When I was a younger Special Forces officer, I had a lot of materials that I had read, mostly from like World War II veterans, that talked about how important Psyops was. And I almost felt like typical young SF guy, I almost felt like, oh yeah, you got to say that. They're great guys. But I believed, like, yeah, they're supporting folks, and looking back at it now, I'm like, okay, now I actually get it. The combat veterans before me saw this, meaning if my goal is to physically kill someone with weapons, artillery, I have to physically kill them. It's black and white. If my job is to convince them that their situation is hopeless, I don't know how much that's going to spread. And if I do it well, the potential range of that weapon system is massively more effective than my killing systems. And I saw that firsthand. Now, as you kind of hinted at, there are some bad examples of Psyops gone wrong and some good examples. And the U.S. military, we struggle with this, because we're struggling the last 20 years. It's been on and off again with what we think of our Psyops forces. We're going to rename them. We're calling them something else. But they're very powerful. It's a powerful tool. So in the context of this story, I'll say the bad stuff first. We were trying to tell the Iraqis to surrender based on our experience in the Gulf War 10 years previously, where literally tens of thousands of guys surrendered. So we just assumed they're all going to surrender again. We did not take into account Saddam had done some brilliant, although brutal, things to, he applied his AR lessons of, I'm not going to let that happen again. So he did some really innovative, weird stuff. One, I think he told everybody, hey, if anybody surrenders, I just want to make sure I'm killing your entire extended family back here. So there's that. Then if anybody's got a little plan, like you all think you're going to surrender at the last minute and you've all conspired, he actually, from at least what our information was, at one of his division commander staff meetings, he told all the division commanders to change seats. And yes. From an American perspective, you're like, that's complete madness. He's like, hey, Khalid, you are now the 3rd division commander. Aziz, you now have the 4th division. But it did break any schemes his officers may have been plotting. Try to picture that for a second. General Kaleem left at 9:00 to go to the meeting, and General Aziz is the guy that came back. And you're like, what the hell? But so he did a bunch of this kind of stuff, and it was actually very, very effective. And we, the United States, did not consider, we thought people will surrender or they won't. We actually hadn't considered the third course of action, where what if they just desert? What if they all just take off their uniforms and run away? And that's actually predominantly what happened. But so in our message to tell them to surrender, this is actually one of my favorite weirdo stories. The United States is doing its thing. We're sending radio broadcasts. We're probably dropping leaflets, whatever. And the Kurds, as we're getting to know our Kurdish counterparts, and this is actually the Kurdish underground telling me this, they're like, hey, why did you guys do it that way? And we're like, what do you mean? And it's an interesting cultural dynamic, the language barrier thing. Because Arabs are like this, Kurds are like this. They're not going to insult you and say, what you're doing is wrong. They're going to hint 2 or 3 times. I don't know if that was the best way to do it. I don't even think they would say it that harshly. A good friend of mine who was an Arab explained this to me years later. He's like, I come to your house and you ask me if I want a Coke. And I say no. Of course I want a Coke, but I'm not going to take it on the first offer. That's rude. And then you Americans don't come back and ask me if I want a Coke again, and I never get a drink. And like, that's one of my favorite lessons from an Arab friend of mine. He goes, of course I want a Coke, but I'm not going to say yes. They don't want to offend you. So it's the same thing here. So one of the Kurdish guys goes, I don't understand why you're doing it that way. And we said, what do you mean? He goes, it's not important. Don't worry about it. And that was a cue for us to be like, there's obviously something concerning. It took us 3 times to come back and go, what is the issue? And finally he goes, we know you hate the Iraqis. We just wouldn't do it that way. And we're like, honestly, we don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, why are you making fun of them? Why are you taunting them? And we're like, you mean the surrender message? He goes, yeah. He goes, we assumed your goal was to not get any of them to surrender. And what he tells us is the way you're saying it, from our perspective, we thought we're saying it professionally and polite. The way they're interpreting it as, it's effeminate. Like we're saying, hey, I would like you to consider surrendering. That's horrifyingly offensive to them, because like, consider surrendering. What kind of man do you think I am? I should decide to surrender. You think I'm a coward? That's the way they took it, where they're saying, no, you should tell them you have no choice. You must surrender. They're like, a man can accept that. And we're like, oh, this is actually really, and they also said something to the effect of the grammar you're using is also somewhat, again, while we think it's formal and polite, it's coming across as effeminate. So it's like we're making fun. And they said, no man, if he wanted to, could accept this surrender. So like, that's useful feedback. They also told us, and Iraqi vets from the day may remember this, there was a lot of weird accounts after the invasion where we found jet fighters buried. Do you remember that? Like,
I remember hearing something about that, but I never got any more
You can
details.
Google it. There's still great pictures of it. And when we found this stuff, we're like, so weird. They're burying their equipment. And they told us afterwards, they're like, you told us to bury it. We're like, what are you talking about? Like, the message, it said bury. We're like, no, it says abandon. We're like, no, that word is bury. And we're like, oh man, Arabic is apparently really tricky.
Wow.
Yeah. So like, that's, okay. So we got a word wrong in the message. And then when I say us, this is the U.S. military. This isn't the special forces. This isn't us. We're just on the receiving end of it. And we're getting some feedback. So that's that part of it. The good stuff that you're hinting at we did, when everything was falling apart and, we don't get the assets we need, one of my young Psyops soldiers one day just goes, hey, I've got a loudspeaker and I'll say a cassette. I don't know if it was a cassette or a CD or whatever it was, but he goes, I got a cassette with tank noises on it. And we're like, okay, this is like the stupidest idea I've ever heard, but we're like, so let's do it. He sets up his loudspeaker on a hilltop about a kilometer from the Iraqi forces, and we just played tank noises all night. I have no idea, did that actually contribute to breaking their morale? Because they did collapse the next day. Like, they freaked out and it became a rout where they're all like retreating. But it cost me nothing, to just broadcast tank noises and just mess with them all night. And that's because the actual American tanks had broken down like 40 kilometers from where we were and couldn't get to us. So it was very frustrating. And there's other things. There's one particular strike we did. We did an airstrike that was very, very successful because it was raining and the bulk of the Iraqis were sitting in their bunkers. So it was a much more lethal strike than under normal conditions it would have been. But so that was great, but we took the opportunity to capitalize that because we know that an airstrike took place. They know there are Americans here. So instead of now hiding, we're going to communicate with them. And communicating with them is very easy because every single Kurd has an Iraqi person in his cell phone. So if I tell the Kurds, hey, can you get this message to that Iraqi unit 10 kilometers away? They're like, yeah, absolutely. And like they're literally dialing a guy they know. Wow. But the message we conveyed was, hey, let them, and remember now I said, the surrender message is happening, but it's not, no one's taking it and we don't know why. So we're like, okay, tell that unit that we don't want to kill them all, but we can kill them all at any time. Not a true statement. But based on the strike last night, you might think that. And we're like, we want them to surrender, but if they don't, we will kill them all. And we also said the reason we killed that unit last night, and this is somewhat true, that what I'm about to say is true, it's not why we did it. The day before, that unit had killed a Kurdish woman at a checkpoint, because Kurdish people go back and forth across the lines, like, delivering food and stuff like that. She got caught smuggling a jar of gasoline, because I guess gasoline was contraband or something to that effect. So they took the jar, poured it on her, and lit her on fire, and she died. That's typical for those days, unfortunately. Yeah. But the Kurds told us this, and we're like, hey, let's tell that unit that atrocities like that against the population are not acceptable, and we killed that unit in response to them killing that woman. Don't do that. Not acceptable anymore. We want you to surrender. So there's a couple of, and it's like what we're doing is we're amplifying the true lethality of what we can really do with, we're now, and this is the true power of Psyops. As I said before, killing someone is very quantifiable, black and white. I don't want to make it sound like it's easy. It's not. But convincing someone their situation's hopeless, that's actually way more powerful. And that's the game we are now going to play. I'm going to do some lethal things, but I'm also arguably going to convince you your situation is completely. And there's like when we weren't getting the surrender message, we started to convey to the units, have you seen your officers recently? And I know the answer is you haven't. And we're telling them they have abandoned you. Why are you going to die for them? If you think I'm not telling you the truth, go find your officer. And now we're telling them you should abandon your position. You should run for it. We would say things like Saddam is finished. Saddam's time is done. One of my favorite things we did, if folks don't remember from the original Gulf War, we were very worried about environmental disasters. Like Saddam told them in the South during the Gulf War to set the oil wells on fire, which caused tremendous, tremendous problems. We bombarded the Iraqi army through the underground and these cell phone messages, if you will. Do not follow, those kinds of orders because we know who you are. So like if you think you're going to follow Saddam's orders to blow up the oil well or launch chemical weapons, his time is done. You have to know that. And you will be held to account afterwards, General so-and-so. And like we'd say guys' names, to make a point, we are watching you and we know who you are. Do not do it. And then we actually said, take matters into your own hands. Do the right thing for the Iraqi people. Protect the infrastructure for the future of Iraq. And actually, this is something I think I enjoyed quite a lot. We crafted a letter written in English on one side, Arabic on the other. And this goes back to, they know we're here. The jig is up, so to speak. So let's take advantage of it. And we now told them, this is what I refer to as the telemarketer letter, where we literally wrote it with a fill in the blank. It said, Dear General, fill your name in here. You are a highly respected leader within the Iraqi army. We have deliberately chosen you. But this offer is limited. You must act soon. We want you to join our side. And saying, we want you to be a part of Iraq's future. Please do the right thing for you and your people, or your men, your forces. Contact us. And we had like 6 ways to contact us. We got very little feedback from that, because Saddam was doing his thing. But that was actually, we sent those letters through the underground to just drop them all over, Iraqi units. And when we weren't getting the feedback, that's when we changed it to, okay, your officers have abandoned you. Have you seen them? And we were telling them, and this turned out to be very true. We're like, they all have plans to flee to Syria, which is largely true. And when we did, as I said, take Kirkuk, we captured hundreds of guys. Every guy we captured was someone who had no place to run to. We largely got no officers. We got lower enlisted, and many of them were not from Iraq. I don't want to use the term foreign fighters because that conjures up terrorists, but we got like knuckleheads that came to help fight with the Iraqi army from Lebanon, Syria, nearby Arabic countries. And they didn't have relatives to take their uniform on and flee to the next town over. Any Iraqi who did, that's what they did.
Yeah. And I remember that scene specifically, and that's something I put in my notes, telling the Peshmergas not to take their tanks. You mentioned that already with them getting stuck.
Oh, those were American tanks.
Oh, those were American tanks. Right. Okay. And they, but they kept getting stuck, and then you'd have to leave people to guard those. And each time you essentially end up being, like a babysitter, and you're constantly having to tell them and educate them, and then they do it anyways. And you're like, this is the fourth time that you've seen you or your buddies put their hand on the stove, and everybody gets burned.
So this is a controversial topic. So the 173rd Airborne Brigade from Vicenza, Italy, great organization, great unit. We didn't have a great relationship with them. That's just the way it is. They weren't interested in our advice, so to speak. We went to Italy before the invasion to meet with them and and it went terribly. Like that was the first sense of they don't want to hear anything we've got to say. They just want to argue with us. They wanted to argue that they wanted to be in charge. It was really, really weird. So now we're on the ground. We've been on the ground for months, and they parachuted into Bashur Airfield, which is where they parachuted into. And that's fine. The entire purpose of them parachuting in was to then airland C-17s the next day and bring in 4 M1 tanks and I think 11 113 armored vehicles, which was called the MERC, the Medium Response Company from probably Savannah, from the 18th Airborne Corps. So theoretically, that little bit of combat power was like the whole purpose of the jump. And now we had this conventional armor company. So we're like, okay, whatever. It's been weird how we got here, but you're here now. Let's go do some good stuff. They refused to leave the airfield because they, for whatever reason, they were convinced their mission was to hold the airfield at all costs. And I'm like, well, the airfield's in our hands. Like, it's been in our hands forever. It's not in danger. It's 40 kilometers from the front line that we're fighting on. But so there was a real reluctancy or lack of understanding of the situation, what they needed to do. When we finally compelled them to please join us, going west, they didn't take the roads we recommended. And to the point where when they showed us on the map where they were, like, we wanted them to drive right down the main highway. It was like an 8-lane highway. When they showed us the routes they took, it was literally dotted lines that switched back on maps. And we were like, what are you thinking? And they're like, what do you mean? We're like, what do you mean? What do I mean? It's a switchback mountain road. And sure enough, that tank broke down on that one. And then, like, every 10 kilometers, a tank would break down or get stuck, and they'd have to leave 2 113s to guard the tank. And no offense to my conventional brothers, God bless them, I love them, but that's kind of why no mechanized or tank forces, armor forces, got into the fight. And that's actually the event that leads to the guy playing the tape.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what made me think of that, because I wanted to mention that, how frustrating that was for you, where you're sitting here telling these guys, no, you just need to get on the road. You just need to do it this way, and they're not listening to you. Yeah, that had to be super frustrating. And this, I think, is another thing where it kind of hops back and forth in the full story, where you're dealing with regular conventional soldiers and or a general, and he can't find his helmet. And you're sharing, right? And it's sergeant majors and colonels, and they're keep asking, "Hey, where's the general's helmet? Where's the general's helmet?" And it's this like goofy thing where Home Alone, where they keep, "Where's Kevin? Where's Kevin? Where's Kevin? He's not here. He's not here." And it goes back, and you're just like, why is it me? Why would I know where the general's helmet is? And then these guys come back, watch your tone.
Yeah, that's one of the snarkiest stories I have in the book. That's 100% accurate. Like, that's, I laugh every time I read it. I almost don't want to tell too much of that, because I want to leave that one for
Absolutely. I don't want to spoil it for you, but my point is, with that story specifically, is right. The sentiment is effing special forces. Yeah, like they have this in that moment. These people have this like disdain for, I can't just, like, you're not my little ant that is supposed to be doing what I. The funny thing about that, watching my helmet.
Yeah, 100% accurate, and I get that. I will always point out, at my core, I'm an infantry guy. Like, meaning, hey, I used to be an infantry guy, and that's actually like the identity that I still hold at my core, because I loved being an infantry guy. I love Fort Benning. Like that's where I came from. And as a result, I'm there's a conventional guy in here too. So I'm not like from some other team. And I don't like it. I regret it when I see conventional forces like demonstrate this lack of willingness to work with special forces. But I also know in the back of my mind, you've had a bad experience with one of my peers who probably you're probably accurate that he did something stupid, like there's plenty of dumb things, special forces guys can do. Like, meaning, okay, the reason, if I'm working with Kurds, the reason I'm going to put on their uniform and grow a mustache and maybe wear a Kurdish neck scarf is because that's the way they're dressed. And it does have a ability to build mental rapport that I look like you. We look the same. It also, there's an OPSEC value to it that it's keeping me safe because you can't identify me from 100 meters out. That operational logic should also extend to, we got to go talk to the guys from the 82nd Airborne, the 173rd. Maybe want to tone some of that stuff down. And I said this is a real thing. Younger guys without good mentorship and experience will roll into the conventional headquarters with all of their weirdo accoutrements because it feels kind of cool. Like, everybody knows I'm special. And that's, it's a real mental dynamic that needs to be trained out of them of, hey, for the same reason we put the scarf on when I'm working with them, take it off when we go in there. You don't need to wear the scarf in their talk. I know you want to, because you want them all to look at you and go, look at those special forces guys. But the worst thing you can do is what I call the hybrid operator, where you have things on you that look indigenous, like your beard, like your scarf, but you're wearing a baseball hat and you got the coolest looking weapon I've ever seen. And you also have like some weird patch on your sleeve.
Reflective Oakleys.
Yeah, right. It's like you're mixing and matching two worlds and it's not having utility for either one. It's an education point. Be the professional special operator where you can turn it on and off based on your audience. That's when you've arrived. That's when you're actually a real operator.
I will say this from being in the special operations compound, and I was on the task force the entire time I was in. So it was strange to me because you see those guys that are coming in, and of course I know who's the CAG guys. Mm-hmm. I know who's them, Dev Guru, and those were the only SEALs I worked with was Dev. We didn't work with them much because it's primarily CAG. The SF guys, now that's the one thing that I never worked with special forces other than, CAG. So you would see a CAG guy and the guys that we would see, it's almost more eerie when they're in a complete uniform, looks completely clean, but they have this lumberjack beard and they're just like, you can see that they're so suntanned from having spent so much time in the sun, and they're out there wearing, their little the reflective Oakleys are the one thing you have to do. That is more eerie to me than the guy who walks up and he's in total Peshmerga. And I had a special forces guy come up to the compound because they weren't allowed into our SOCOM compound. They just didn't have the authority to go through. And so this E7 is asking me if I know a guy, and I'm a PFC, in Ranger Regiment in Afghanistan. And he's standing outside the gate like, hey, is, the Delta guy so-and-so that I went through training with, and he had moved on to Delta. And it was such a weird feeling for me to be like, I'm a PFC, you're a 7, you got a lumberjack beard, but you're not allowed to come in here. And for me, it was frustrating because I thought that for sure those were going to be guys I would get to work with, the A teams, right?
Yeah.
Not exactly, I didn't think Mr. T would be there, but I thought the same thing.
It's not that far off,
I'm going to see Face, I'm going to see all these other characters that I grew up with and loved about Special Forces, but I never got to work with those guys. It was only ever the CAG, those guys that were a part of the task force. Was that ever something? Did you guys ever do anything with task force yourself or anything like that?
Not too much. As Iraq, more so Iraq. My experience is more in Iraq. I did a tour in Afghanistan, but I did multiple in Iraq and longer tours in Iraq. As Iraq started to develop around 2004, the counterinsurgency part of it started to develop. Task Force had a strike force, 714, that used to go out and just, do great strikes. And they were doing, I want to say they were doing so well, but there was so much work, they did turn to the special forces community and said, hey, do you have a force that you can chop over to me? Which we did. We used to have specialized companies called the SIFs and CRIFs. And that company chopped in half, and half of it was literally chopped to the task force to do unilateral strikes. And the other half became the advisory component that created and advised the thing called Iraqi ICTF and Iraqi Commandos, which was a phenomenal Iraqi unit that it's as good as they ever got. Incredible how good they were. But that's the only time we were really doing the same stuff as the CAG guys. We're 100% integrated with them. Those guys were actually chopped to them under their control.
Wow, that's fascinating. So that was something else that I thought of too, is you guys were training these indigenous forces, and I was going to ask you what, not obviously to say they were like at the level of being infantrymen, or what level would you say was the best that we were able to train up the Iraqi special forces during your time?
The top Iraqi, here's the deal. Their forces were good. And that's actually a really interesting question, because like if anybody's got, when you fight a war, we've done this in every war. We create derogatory terms for the enemy because it's going to be easier for us to mentally kill them if we refer to them in some derogatory term. And we tend to think they're not good fighters. And then as we get to know them, we're like, they're exactly like us. Like if they have good training and good discipline and good leadership, son of a gun, they're good units. And like the top one we ever built was called the Iraqi Counterterrorist Force, the ICTF. I mean, now it's funny because we often criticize ourselves that like we can't make them in our image. We cloned ourselves. Like they dressed like us, they acted like us, they joked around like us, they looked 100% like us. They were outfitted with all of the exact same equipment as us. And I would tell you, I mean, the ICTF was as proficient as our SIFs were. A lot of people don't know this, but so the SIF, the Special Forces SIFs, used to have a
what does that stand for?
Commanders in Extremis Force. Okay. They were disbanded a few years ago, unfortunately. They kind of brought them back recently, but it's not exactly the same thing. But they were a specialized company that had higher level direct action skills and a hostage rescue requirement. And it started from having forward station forces in Stuttgart and Okinawa and once upon a time in Panama. Like they were already forward, so it made sense for them to have a hostage rescue requirement or capability. They were really, really proficient. That's what I did as a team leader in Stuttgart. The degree of extra training you got was massive compared to the rest of the Special Forces community. So it did make you better. So people don't know, it's not well known, but in the latter years of Iraq, I want to say like 2010, maybe 11, there was a terrorist hostage event in Baghdad where I can't remember who they were. It doesn't matter if they were Al-Qaeda or JAM, but they took over a Christian church in Baghdad, had like 100 hostages, tied up in this church. The ICTF responded without they did everything. They didn't wait for us. The friend of mine was the company commander that was advising him, and he was at dinner with the counterpart company commander, and they got word, their beepers went off, and they responded, and they did a as complex of a hostage rescue scenario as you could possibly imagine. They executed it flawlessly.
Wow.
To the point where there were suicide bombers in the church waiting to detonate themselves, and they successfully killed all of the suicide bombers before they were able to actually detonate. And they did all of this without our assistance. So when I say they were well-trained, yeah, they were really well-trained.
Wow.
So that was the ICTF. The commandos were a notch below them, but also super proficient. And like in Iraqi lingo, the commandos are their rangers. Like they are good. They can crush the enemy. And so there was one ICTF battalion in Baghdad. We had a commando battalion in Baghdad, a couple of others supporting, like Recce. There was a Recce company that was really sophisticated. Mm-hmm. And then because it was such a successful model, we built a commando battalion in Mosul. We built a commando battalion in Basra. We built a commando battalion out west somewhere. I can't remember where. So they became like regional, and they were just wreaking havoc on the enemy.
Wow. And this was going to be my question because of your experience in the Q course, right? You were a selection instructor.
No, officers. I ran the officer phase.
The officer
twice.
phase.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were doing only the officers. So with having gone through that experience and then working with the Iraqis at their highest level of guys, what commonalities did you see between the soldiers that would succeed going through your course and the Iraqis that were going through their commando course?
Again,
those things?
For the guys who spent a lot of their time working hand to hand with guys, if you have any cultural misperceptions, like, well, they're exactly as good as us. They have guys that suck, and they have guys that are just pure, fierce warriors that are disciplined and smart and good leaders. And like, same thing. It's weird because let's say I'm talking the counterinsurgency years. This war's been going on for 5 years. And it's been, bumpy, to say the least. If there's an Iraqi commander, he's there because he's good. You know what I mean? Like who do you think is Iraqi commander 5 years into this war? Nobody is calling their cousin in the government to be like, can I get a command? Like nobody wants that. And there's one guy I'm thinking of. His name was General Boss. He was the commander of the Hill of SWAT. So in addition to the thing called the ICTF, which is a battalion, and the 5 or 6 commando battalions we built, we also built about 30 to 35 what we called Iraqi SWAT units. And they range from maybe company, battalion size. And they're in every single town.
And company, just for people that aren't familiar with, how large is a company? How large is
let's say it's like 60 members.
Okay.
So it's anywhere from it's probably anywhere from like 60 to 150 Iraqi soldiers. And they're, we call them ISWATs, Iraqi SWAT. They're just like police SWAT units. Not quite trained as high as the commandos, but nevertheless still pretty proficient. And they know the territory. This is their town. So that's a huge thing. So they all have special forces ODAs, or in some cases SEAL platoons attached to them as their trainers and advisors, and just doing great stuff. So this is lost on a lot of the conventionals, and I do talk about it a little bit in the book because it's not really well documented anywhere. We special forces, and when I say special forces in this context, we had SEALs attached to us. So they're in this batch too. We're providing easily a division worth, of combat power to the coalition's efforts with indigenous SWAT, commando, and Iraqi counterterrorist force. So that's massive. This force multiplier, if you will. And like I said, there you find guys that have just either risen through the ranks, probably even more so than the American military, because again, we're in combat. Like it's pure combat for them. If you became the commander of the so-and-so unit, it's because you're dedicated, you're patriotic in your own right. I can't tell you, every veteran has these stories. The guy that you liked, that you worked with, you found that they were doing it, and you're like, why are you doing this? And he says things that are like more patriotic than anything you've ever heard. He's like, I'm doing it for my family. I'm doing it so my son has a future. And I'm like, when you experience that, it does change you a little bit to realize, hey, these are good people. They have the same values we do for the most part. They want something better for their family. If it seems like they didn't act like that 1 or 2 years ago, it's probably because they felt like they had no hope. There was no option. There was no route for a better life. Once they saw a route for a better life, a swath of the population has now decided this is what I want. And they're willing to risk their lives to fight for it. It's powerful when you're there. Like this guy's not getting a medal. He's probably not getting retirement. His only path to success is crafting a better government. So it's really impressive.
And and going back to that question, as far as commonalities between the ones that were successful, again, for young men that are watching this right now, what would you say are some common traits that you've seen between the Iraqis that are right, because their situation is very dire, and American has many options.
Yeah. Well, a simple answer is some of it is a little bit of luck of the draw. Like, did they have, just like when you join the military, did you get into I don't want to say a system, but like, were there people who were good trainers, good mentors, good examples? If they have those things, it will trickle down. And hopefully, at least the special forces guys, like we were providing that, hopefully in most cases, if not all cases. And that resonates throughout the force. Now, I will say, in 2012, right after we sort of met, our main withdrawal from Iraq, we did start to see more of the, he's putting his cousin in charge of the battalion. And we did the best we could to stop that kind of stuff and we stopped a lot of it. Some of it we didn't stop, unfortunately. So that's bad. But the training that makes an American soldier good, it's exactly the same. Like, imagine if you were an Iraqi, right? You've never even imagined having the kind of training and equipment that we have. But now I give it to you. And you're also like a little bit touched that they thought we would never give them the good equipment, that kind of thing. But we do. And then also and by the way, when we do something, I'm going to be right next to you. And when we gave our guys permission to accompany forces, the ICTF, as an example, the Iraqi counterterrorist force, if we knew they had a particularly complex mission and we were concerned, for the most part, our concerns were, like a nervous parent, like they've got it. But we would make a decision. And when I say we, I was doing something else. I wasn't one of the guys running with the ICTF, but I had a lot of friends that did. They would put on Iraqi uniforms and mix into the stack with them. Now, don't ask me why. The uniform that the Iraqi counterterrorists wore was Latvian camouflage. I can't explain why. It was really cool looking, actually.
Yeah.
But like, it was different than the regular Iraqi military, which did kind of distinguish them as elite forces. But, you know, again, if it was a really bad target, like in the case of some of the targets they did in Sadr City or Karbala or Najaf, we would have our guys dressed like them, and every fourth guy would be an American, and we would just mix in with them. That kind of confidence and trust is immeasurable.
Absolutely.
And so I say 4 years later, when they did that mission 100% on their own, and by the way, you know, the latter years too in Iraq, like they were the thing that they were the glue. All of these forces were called ISAF later in the ISAF brigade. ISAF brigade is the thing that held Iraq together in the latter years against ISIS. They took massive casualties, but I mean, they truly, really held the country together. All the stories you've heard about the Iraqi military falling apart under ISIS, the ISAF didn't. The ISAF stood their ground and took massive casualties. I mean, they really are heroes to the Iraqi nation. And we have our fingerprints on that.
That's awesome. And that's one of the things I think as I'm reading through your book, is it gives you that feeling like you just said, you guys were really giving it your all. And the ones that you're working with are receptive to that. And they're really putting forth that effort. Obviously, I think there's a lot of YouTube videos that have gone around with many, many millions of views where you see the contractor trainers trying to train them to do jumping jacks. And there's 50 of them, and not a single one of them can coordinate their body enough to do a single jumping jack on time. But then I want to bring this up because you also see the time where the Iraqi is trying to hand his Kurdish guy's trying to hand his rifle off to the guy, accidentally shoots him, right? ADs. That literally happened in Afghanistan in Bagram, where I was at, and it was a Marine doing, hands his rifle off to another Marine and ends up shooting him in the face and killing him right there. I didn't witness this. They just told us, like, hey, if you're going to Chow, it's all blocked off right now. This is what just happened. And then and I want to bring this up with it, the three third Special Forces guys that AD the automatic grenade launcher Mark 19 twice near the aid station. And just the reality is that those types of things do happen. Yeah. Now, as we all know, the standard is the standard. If you're in the Rangers, you do it one time, you're gone. You guys are also having to deal with that with these Kurds and with people that didn't sign up to be special ops, that didn't sign up for all these things. And you're trying to make sure they don't accidentally shoot themselves or somebody else. But that's something that tends to come. Another AD, this guy accidentally shoots himself in the thigh. That type of thing was something you guys always had to work with. Yeah,
so let me address the two parts of that. I'm going to talk about the Americans first. So there's obviously at least one story, if not maybe a couple stories in the book, where one of my sister Special Forces units, has some bad events. Okay, let me clarify this for folks. That, because I do have some friends, for the most part, we've joked about this. That's a period in time. So, like, okay, if that guy did something bad, it does not mean in perpetuity. Exactly. 3rd Special Forces Group is terrible. 10th Special Forces Group is great. It means that individual in time, coincidentally, who was assigned to that unit, didn't do a good job. These are all great units. People who do bad things, it's just the way it is. Or, who do something regrettable. So there's a story in the book where a team has a couple of accidental discharges with the Mark 19 on my compound. Not super happy about that. And then later, same team accidentally fires a star cluster into one of their guys' faces. If anybody's wondering what that, if I have to explain that, so for my friends,
please do.
So a star cluster is like a metal tube about the size of the cardboard inside a paper towel, roll of paper towels, and it's a handheld flare. And it's designed that when you open it up, you take the cap off. The cap has a firing pin on it. You put it on the backside, and you hit it. It fires the flare. This individual at the time was employing, and it's also worth noting, in 2003, war is still a novelty. Like, meaning we're all learning things, but we don't have 20 years of combat experience. So subsequently, sometimes some of the things that we think are good ideas turn out to be stupid ideas. In this case, the individual thought that pre-priming a star cluster was a good combat technique because it would be ready. And there was a popular backpack at that time that had a specific tube for a star cluster, which, by the way, is a really stupid idea. Because if a star cluster gets hit with a round, you're not going to appreciate what it looks like, burning on your back. But so he loaded it into that side pocket, and then when they were loading their rucksacks into the vehicles, he hit it, and it fired and hit him right in the face. Fortunately, he had a pair of Oakleys on, and that actually diverted a tremendous amount of it. And then there was also an incident, same team, where they tried to call close air support on one of my teams, and we got into a massive argument over that. And I subsequently ended up throwing them out of my sector. And I make that point again that, hey, nobody who's from one unit or the other should take offense to that. You should take offense to those guys. They could have been from my unit. They could have been from somewhere else. That's just the way it worked out. With regard to the indigenous forces and accidental discharges, this is a really interesting point because I've worked with a lot of foreign militaries, and I don't think we as Americans, we take for granted even the most conventional part of the military. Where actually that may be a bad example, where we've taught young soldiers to be terrified of their weapons.
Right.
But we do a good job of, hey, the front of the weapon where the bullet comes out, don't ever casually point that at anybody. We do pretty good at that in the American military. And I didn't realize how much of that until I started working with other militaries, regular militaries, like massively waving their weapons in front of me, really, really weird stuff. Then you get irregular forces like this, or Iraqi forces during the counterinsurgency years, and it's rampant. And for anybody who doesn't know, an AK-47, I would go so far as to say it doesn't have a safety. It kind of does, but it kind of doesn't. So it's very common that your AK-47, is, for lack of a better term, hot at all times. And you're wearing it on your side, and, it's really not unusual for the trigger to get tapped on something and it fires. And 90% of accidental discharges go into your thigh. Just the way it is. There's a different event in the book I talk about where literally the Iraqi police were sent to go do combat stuff. And they were probably all issued AK-47s, and they're not familiar with AK-47s. And they were literally having accidental discharges every hour. And I was one of the guys having to deal with, literally for the first day, you'd hear a shot, and you'd respond like it was a sniper. After the 10th time, you'd hear a shot and be like, okay, let's go see who shot themselves. And we'd have to go patch their leg up, and, we'd deal with it. But there was one regrettable story where the team leader, Captain Joe Locke, had just briefed a nighttime attack plan, and it's a great story. It was a good plan. They were just getting ready to move out to this is Ranger School. They're about to kick off and move through the lines, go into a single file, and move to the attack position. And he says to the Kurdish commander, "Hey, could you just do me a favor and stress to your guys to just be careful with muzzle awareness? I mean, we're a little uncomfortable. The guys are being a little careless." And the Kurdish commander says, "Oh no, absolutely, absolutely." And as he says that, literally a shot rings out from 20 feet away from them, and one young Kurdish, I'm going to say private, accidentally shot his best friend and killed him. And you want to talk about morale just being sucked out of everyone before a very important combat nighttime operation. And the Kurds almost kicked it off like an SOP, where I don't know if I explained this in the book. They the punishment for the guy who accidentally shot his friend was to it sounds very, I don't mean it to sound as brutal as it is, but they we would put a body in a body bag. They don't have body bags. So they rolled him up in a rug. Rugs are something they have an abundance of. So they rolled him up in a rug, put the rug in the back of the car, and he had to transport his body back to his friend's home and explain what happened. That was his punishment. It was really interesting to watch. It was, a horrible event, but it makes that point again of accidental discharges with foreign soldiers and AK-47s is so rampant. It's actually pretty crazy.
That's wild. And that's what I thought of while I was listening to that is I put myself in that position because as a police officer years later, I was having to do death notifications. And so I thought, man, if I was the cause of this death and now I have to go knock on this guy's door at 2 a.m. and let him know that his 19-year-old son just died and it's my fault and I have to tell him how I accidentally killed
and I want to stress again, it's just call it a lack of training. So when someone's being careless, they don't know they're being careless. It's just that's the way they're raised. And this isn't in the book. This is one of the weird stories I actually remembered that it didn't make it into the book for whatever reason. The battalion commander I was working with, Lieutenant Colonel Ken Tovo, we both come in a few weeks before the invasion, and we've infiltrated to assure them that the American effort's not falling apart. We have to show them some confidence. Look, they sent 2 officers in, and we have a good meeting with them. It's great. Our first, what we call the first meeting with the guerrilla chief. We're meeting with the top Kurdish guy, and to solidify this relationship, they want to present Colonel Tovo with a special Saddam pistol. So they break out this pistol and they make a point that it's got Saddam's special crest on the thing. And he and I still actually laugh about this. When they're explaining this pistol, this pistol is only carried by his elite forces. This pistol is very, very special. And we are very comfortably we're like, oh, that's really, and we probably look ridiculous, like that we're squirming. And it's almost like, and they're not doing it deliberately, but it seems like, my God, they cannot help but point it at us like as if it's somehow you really need to see what it looks like from the front. And if this goes on for at least a minute of them just saying this pistol is only carried by his. So finally they hand him the pistol. He hands it to me. They step away. He and I just kind of look at each other. I slide it back. Oh yeah, it's loaded. And we both joked that we're like, yeah, not only is it loaded, I'm sure the guy who loaded it thought his day was going to go a lot differently that day. Meaning it was loaded by an Iraqi commander, someone they killed on the battlefield, God knows when. They've never thought to unload it or clear it. They just took his pistol as a war trophy and now they're giving it to us. I'm like, yeah, the guy who loaded that pistol, his day went very differently than he expected.
Yeah. Wow, that is an awesome story. And it just reminds me of that actually happened. I was trying to train my wife right before she leaves for Marine Corps boot camp. And we just go to the gun range and she's right in front of me. I'm standing right behind. I'm hugging her back. And somebody drops a broom and it slams. And inside there it echoes so loud. I thought somebody AD'd behind me. I do this and I see what it is. Okay, cool. I turn around. She has the gun in my chest, almost touching my chest, not touching it, with her finger on the trigger and says, I don't want to shoot this anymore.
Glad to hear that.
And I instantly thought I should move and grab it. And
it's that ranger reflex of yours.
It's the ranger reflex.
Not serving you well.
But then I was just like, if I do that, she's going to accidentally shoot me.
Yeah.
So I slowly grabbed it and just death gripped the barrel and the slide and took her hand off. I said, go sit down. And that's when she realized what she had just done. That I can't even imagine sitting there doing this while I had the loaded 45.
I had the same thing years earlier.
Heart racing just hearing that story.
It was I'm not going to say what country, but it was an international special forces guy, and he was showing off the pistol that his family gave him for graduation, and he took it out and same thing. It seems like he cannot stop pointing at us to the point where when he was saying what a great pistol is, I love this pistol. This pistol's great. He even checked. Yeah, oh no, yeah, it is loaded. I just want to make sure it's loaded. And we both were like, we're trying to keep cool. Yeah, I love those. That's a great pistol.
Yeah. But and I wanted to bring that story up specifically because that was something that stuck in my brain rent free. Was this that special forces guys had AD these Mark 19? Mm-hmm. I don't want anybody to come away from reading your book and think that exactly what you just said, and that's why I wanted you to say it again here plainly is. You're obviously not putting down the 3rd Special Forces Group or any soldier. It's the reality of what happens in a combat scenario where good, highly trained people, and that was my point. The same as my wife. My wife goes on to shoot the same qualification, almost perfect from the 500-yard line with iron sights in the Marine Corps boot camp. She knows how to do that now. It's just, that's reality. That's something you have to deal with, though you constantly are dealing with that. In addition to, it just seemed like green on green and coordinating to make sure that there are no friendly fires, both between the Americans that are coming into the area and the Kurds and these. It seems like there's a section in the middle of the book where it's almost like that's what all you're doing. And you're just, I feel like you're exhausted as I'm reading your words, where it's just one after another of, we got to move these people because I know they're going to accidentally fire on them and they think they're enemy and they keep trying to call in fire and you keep telling them, those are our people, quit trying to call in. And they're calling on a back channel and you're like, hey, quit trying to kill my people.
I think I'm still a little bit tired from that endeavor 23 years ago. There's a lot of examples in the story about close calls with friendly fire. And I hope that resonates with readers, how important it is to pay attention to that aspect. Because going into it as an officer, one of my biggest concerns, and I want to make sure I say this, and I don't want to sound cavalier or overly dramatic, but for anybody, so many people are combat veterans now. But I go back in the day when combat was a novelty. At least for me, my first response was, when you're going to this combat, I was not so much afraid of dying, and I don't mean to make that sound cavalier. I was afraid of performing badly. Like that was truly, and when I say performing badly, I mean, I'm not going to be able to deal with this if I do something that results in one of my guys' deaths. Like so I mean, that's the thing that kept me up at night. Not, oh my God, I might get killed. Because not to sound cavalier again, but like if you get killed, you get killed. I'd love to pretend, as we all have been through, like if you're squared away, you won't get killed. It doesn't work that way. I wish it did, but it doesn't. So you kind of you're pretty good at putting that out of your mind. Like if it happens, it happens, and I'm going to do the best I can to avoid that. But the thing that I can hopefully control is I need to be able to do my job proficiently. And as an officer, my job, it's not just, I'm not going to say to keep the guys alive, but to execute the plan and not allow guys to accidentally shoot friendlies or something like that. So that was paramount on my mind going in. And there's probably at least 5 instances where it, was this close to, it could have gone very differently. And I'm super grateful that it didn't, like that we pulled off all of those events by the skin of our teeth where someone was this close to accidentally shooting someone that they shouldn't have shot, and we were able to intervene, whether it was me stopping it or someone else. Case in point, one of the TTPs outlined in the book, again, it's actually 0A3, Captain Joe Locke's team. On the front lines of the Green Line, he talked about how they were so physically exhausted, and here's the reality. If you go to war, yeah, you're going to be exhausted, like to a degree that is hard to fathom, and his point was, we have been awake for 48 hours. Everyone is punchy. If we're going to call a grid coordinate to an airstrike, 3 people are going to check the numbers. And I thought that was brilliant. And as a young captain, that he comes up with this thing like, I say it, you read the numbers back, and a third guy is then recording it and repeats it. And they instituted that by themselves. And he admits, we found at least twice where we were going to, we superimposed grid coordinates. And I'm like, that's a fantastic lesson for someone to take away, how you can't try to move too quickly. You've got to be methodical and also recognizing you're operating in a degraded status. You're nervous, you're hyped up, you're exhausted, and mistakes will happen. So training does help a lot of that, training and experience.
And that's something this secular, there was a study done that I just recently heard of where they did sleep deprivation training. I think it was like Sean Ryan show. And what they found was they would keep giving these guys math tests, very simple math tests, and just rudimentary things that it lulled them with their confidence into still believing that they were getting the right answers each time. And not just that they thought they were getting the right answers, they knew these were the right answers. And each time they were just getting worse and worse and worse at very simple addition, subtraction, nothing crazy. And that's what I found going through Ranger School back when it was still hard, where because they had lowered, my understanding is now they allow them more sleep than no sleep, because that's what I got for 5 days. And if you get recycled, you get to do that again, and you get 3 more phases of that. So I did 4 phases of no sleep for a week straight, 5 days for patrols. And yeah, exactly what you're talking about. And I remember as we're calling in things and as we're trying to do that, we would have to do the same thing where we as students are like, hey, you police me when I'm trying to make this math call here, because if we screw this up, then we all fail this patrol, and we ended up calling in an airstrike on ourselves. And I remember a real true life when I was in the Ranger Regiment, as a forward observer, they said there were some special forces guys that in Afghanistan, and I don't know, and that's why I'm bringing it up though, because it was widely known that they had had to replace the batteries.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
If you would kind of recount, because I don't remember all the details, but that was fascinating.
It's another great example. So like, look, here's the deal. If we go to big war, like let's say we're in a state of peace and tomorrow we decide we're going to war, what happens is all of a sudden, all this technology that we've been hanging on to, we dump it onto the units. Like we race to get them all this technology. And it's overwhelming because like, I get it. You think you're helping me, but you're crushing me with all of this stuff. So in 2001, when we started deploying forces to Afghanistan, we're suddenly getting all of these like new GPSs,
Garmin's.
the Garmin's, but the pluggers we had, which was the military version of a GPS, was like this big. And of course, it took some odd-shaped battery that fits nothing else.
L-shaped battery.
But we're getting all this different equipment. And in that case, like we were learning the hard way, things we didn't know about the equipment. What you're talking about is when the batteries ran out and you take the batteries out, the display defaults back to like the last grid coordinate. So the guy was thinking he was putting in the grid there. It reset it to the grid you're at. He called the grid, and that turned out they ended up calling fire on themselves. And like that's a good example of things you don't know if you haven't worked with equipment for a long time. So like when you're dumping all of the newest cutting edge equipment on me, it sounds great. You're kind of setting me up for failure because I don't know that. Case in point, like the guy that had the accidental discharge with the Mark 19. I can't say this for sure, but I have a hunch he wasn't that familiar with the Mark 19.
Right.
And I used to be a Mark 19 gunner in the infantry. So I knew when they were like, oh, it just had an AD. I'm like, no, it didn't. It doesn't work like that. Like I know how a Mark 19 works. That kind of stuff happens when you just overload them with stuff they're not familiar with. So it's a really tricky balance.
That's awesome. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up too was kind of going off of what we were just talking about, near misses. So you mentioned an instance in your book where a rocket hit the transformer, and a few seconds later, another rocket hits the side of the building where you guys were standing, looking at a map 5 minutes prior, and then you jumped in your vehicles and sped away. And these are the types of things that I've lived through multiple times. And this is the part where civilians tend to check out of stories and be like, okay, he made that up. This near miss, right?
This is a great story of my combat prowess. So again, I'm talking about a period where, look, I have some experience. I had some operational experience, but not like, overwhelming combat. So this is a relatively new. We're all in the same boat for the most part. So I've now infiltrated into northern Iraq. I'm dressed like a Kurd. They're taking me around, showing me different parts of the battlefield. There's the enemy there. There's the enemy there. So we go to this one meeting, and we're in a room. We have a meeting. We talk about what we think we're going to do next week. We walk out of the building. There's probably 400 Kurds milling about in the street, and there's probably 20 vehicles, because the theory is after this meeting they're going to put us in these trucks and we're going to go drive to the front line and see the enemy positions we just talked about. In this particular case, it's mountains that are right there, high ground. That's where the enemy is. Well, as it turns out, they can see us, and they can see an unusual amount of traffic and vehicles. So when we come out into the street, I didn't hear it necessarily, but a Katyusha rocket was fired, and I don't know if this is going to make sense because this is an older person thing, like the terrible movie a long time ago with Steve Martin and the Jerk. Mm-hmm. There's a scene where a sniper is shooting at him and the bullets keep hitting the vending machine, and Steve Martin's character keeps yelling, "These sodas are defective." I felt very similar to that. That will resonate with a small amount of your audience. But the first Katyusha rocket came screaming through the air, and it slammed into a transformer on a telephone pole. And it made, as if you've ever heard a transformer explode, it made a particularly twangy, big explosion. And like, we didn't jump to the ground. We all like turned, and I was like, that's weird. Because my first thought was the transformer just exploded. What I'm talking about is probably in the difference of 1 second. Then the second rocket came in, and I heard the swoosh on this one, and it slammed. It was actually between the transformer that exploded and where I'm standing. It went between us, and it hit the wall of the building we just walked out of and blew a hole right through the wall that shredded the desk that we just had a map on that we were all talking over. Now, this time we've snapped out of it. Like every person here realizes what just happened, and we're all running seemingly in opposing directions to get to, the vehicles we want to get to. We jump in the vehicles, and I do find this kind of amusing because more rounds are coming in. It's very, very chaotic now. And the youngest, Kurdish Peshmerga privates that are the drivers of these vehicles, these very decrepit old pickup trucks, they had very explicit instructions, just like a Ranger private, that, drive to the front lines. That's what they were told before the shooting started. So now we jump in the vehicles, jump in the back, jump in the front, and we scream, "Go!" So they follow instructions. They make the vehicle go as fast as the vehicle goes, but we are racing toward the enemy. And it's a bit surreal because I am actually literally in the back tailgate of this truck. And it's the unsafest driving I have ever done by far. And I'm rolling around with the other 3 guys in the back of the truck. And sure enough, one of the guys in the back of the truck, he's an American, but I don't know him. He's a CIA guy, and he introduces himself. He's like, "Hey, I'm so-and-so." I'm like, I'm so-and-so too. Good to meet you. And like literally, as I'm peeking over the sides of this pickup truck, I'm seeing mortar rounds hit left and right on the road. And the kid is actually doing a pretty good job of like serpentining this vehicle. But the crazy thing is we are still driving toward the enemy. So we get to our final destination, which is the equivalent of like a hilltop that can oversee the hilltop that's shooting at us. And the shooting has somewhat stopped. We get out of the vehicles. The Kurdish guys are like, "That's the enemy." To which I'm like, "Yeah, I think I got it. I think I figured it out on the drive up here." And this is actually a cool part of this too. They start to shoot at us again. And the Kurdish commander that was with us gave us a look like, no, those aren't close. And what he is demonstrating is an ability to hear the whistle of the round and determine that's actually not going to be close. And then there's another one where it's going to be close and he goes, "Get down." Now, in my younger days, I'm like, my God, how much combat experience do you have to be able to do that? Well, I learned that. Fast forward 5 years later in Iraq, I'd gotten rocketed and artilleried so many times by the insurgent forces, I unfortunately developed that same skill. And for listeners that may not understand, so like in the movies, older movies, when you hear the whistle, what that is that's the round breaking the sound barrier. It's literally ripping the air. Because the way it's ripping the air, much like the way bullets look in the Matrix, right? Mm-hmm. You can only hear it if you are on line with the gun tube. So if you're off to the sides and you don't really hear the whistling, it's not close. If you hear the whistling and the sound is moving, it's also called the Doppler effect. The sound is moving faster than the round. The sound will precede the round on at least on the axis that the round is firing. That's how you know, get down, it's close. And unfortunately, in 2007, I developed that same proficiency of I could tell by the sound in the air. I also was able, and I'm saying this because I remember thinking about that guy. I could distinguish the sound of a mortar tube firing from 3 or 4 kilometers away. And like you said, how do you know it wasn't someone dropping a broom or a barrel? I don't know, but I could tell the distinct, because it's not loud, what I'm talking about. It's, you're like, that sounds like a round. And then you'd hear the whistling, like, get down. I'm like, no one should ever develop that skill. But I saw that with the Kurds. And then unfortunately, like I said, I developed it, several years later.
That's awesome. So obviously that really resonates with me, as I will mention in another story. So you bring up and it's right here. So you had 3 SF weapon sergeants, 18 Bravos, and one was a 11 Charlie infantry mortarman previously. One was a Fort observer previously, and the other was a mortar instructor. And essentially, it kind of warms my heart because it's like the roughest game of chicken ever. Yeah. And the winner gets to mention he's in Mark's book. The loser dies. Yeah. And they take on this enemy.
Yeah, this is right up your alley. I'm now thinking of the 3 NCOs. I'm very, very proud of these guys, and I'm still in touch with 2 of them right now. So as I said before, a lot of our promises have fallen through. We feel bad about this. We hate this. And 3 of my NCOs, very, very good NCOs, they come to me and they said, "Hey, can we go to, we call it the front line. It's actually there's 2 front lines. They're in both directions. This is the one that's sort of to our rear. But they're like, same place where that rocket attack happened I just talked about. But like, can we go out to the front line and just hang out with the Peshmerga? We want them to physically see us." And I 100% got that. Like, we feel like we're letting them down. Can we at least be with them? And they sold it to me as we want to just go kind of see their gear, get a sense of their capabilities, which I'm like 100% legitimate. So they're dressed like Kurds. They go out to the front line and they go out there. They come back that evening and they got that look on their face that I am familiar with where they're like, "Okay, let us explain what happened." And I'm like, "What happened?" And they start with, "Everybody's okay." I'm like, "Okay." And it's starting. Yeah. And it's funny because what they're describing to me is like, "Okay, don't get upset. We killed some people today." Because the war hasn't started yet. Like for us, officially, the war hasn't started. They went out to this Kurdish position, and I'm trying to think, this is probably a day or 2 after that shooting, that rocket attack at the map area that I just talked about, same place. But they went out there, they hung out with the Kurdish folks, and the Kurds showed them their equipment, and it's very what you would expect with guerrillas. It's very ad hoc. It's like a Russian mortar tube. It's got like a Chinese sight hose clamped onto it, like jerry-rigged onto it, and it's Iranian mortar rounds. And you can appreciate this. Like, yes, technically they all sort of are the same caliber and fit together, but no one in their right mind would intentionally mix Iranian, Chinese, and Russian equipment in this way. And the Iranian rounds, if you understand how mortar rounds work, there's the charge on the end is called a cheese charge. You put a certain number of them on, and that's how you know how far the round's going to go. The charges are all rotten and old, so they just sort of jam extra ones on there. It's really, really goofy. So the guys are looking at the stuff, and they point out the opposing enemy gun, probably the same gun that shot at us the day before. And the NCOs just said, hey, would you guys be okay if we shoot at that gun? And again, guerrillas, that don't have a lot of training, they probably more tend to use this gun like sort of like a cannon. Like they sort of eyeball where it will land. These guys are professional trained, gunners, if you will. They know how to actually adjust and call for fire. So I think the Kurds must have been like, oh, check this out. The stupid Americans are going to shoot at that guy that shoots at us all the time. And they were like, sure, we're all going to be in the bunkers. You guys have fun. So, they make their adjustments. And I think everybody must have been watching this like it's the greatest TV show they've ever seen. And they fire a round, and the round, let's say, lands 75 meters off the enemy target. Wham. Second later, the enemy fires a round back. That round lands off. But now, instead of like running, the three NCOs, snap into mortar crew mode and are shouting commands. One guy's doing adjustments. One guy's adjusting the gun. One guy's prepping the round. He's calling hang it. They drop it. Second round goes out. And they do it pretty quickly. Second round goes out. And now it's, 30 meters off the enemy target. Now the enemy fires one back. Their round is 30 to 40 meters off. And so like we are truly in a race, a gun battle with an opposing gun. And the third round finds its target, as we say, and they destroy the enemy crew. And I'm sure as they destroyed that enemy crew, they were scrambling to get their final round out. But in that engagement, we won. And the Kurds explode cheering because you got to put this in context. That gun has been harassing these guys for a year. And these crazy Americans that I didn't know anything about, that I was questioning their value.
They had no reason to come up here and jump into this
fight.
They
think about it. They demonstrated a degree of technical proficiency that gave us instant credibility and rapport. And by the way, also the way the guys handled themselves under fire, which actually is pretty cool for us. Because like, again, we're not nearly as combat experienced as all of you guys are. So we have to like make up for it by doing the best we can. And they did demonstrate proficiency under fire. So now word goes through the entire Kurdish force like wildfire that these Americans have skills. These Americans have something to offer. These Americans are warriors. And like that paid giant dividends for us.
And I think of that because of, right, we talk about the airstrikes and our lethality and our reliance on technology. This really showed we're going to take it down to we're both loading, handheld pistols at each other.
I'm glad you said that because it's a human component. Like we're not only valuable to you because we have stuff.
Right.
Like a bag of money or air power. Those are great things. And if I bring them, you'll appreciate them. But now they're connecting with us on a human level that you're a fighter. You're a fighter, that can help me with the things how to use my equipment. And that's super important because truly, if you aspire to advise and train and advise a force, that's what you want. You're not just blindly throwing equipment at them and hoping that they all fall in line and do whatever we say. Like you want to develop a true relationship where, I respect them. I treat them like people I respect, and they respect me as, a partner in their endeavor. It's not an employee boss relationship where I make them do whatever I want. It's a partnership. And that's a super important dynamic for anybody listening, special forces or not, to understand that when we do good things with indigenous forces, if we did well, it's because we treated them truly like a partner, not somebody I was able to manipulate and make them do whatever I want. Like we don't treat them that way. And in special forces, that's a huge thing that I would almost put it like we put a guarantee on our advising. Like what I teach you is legitimate. What I advise you is legitimate. And I will make good on that by being there with you and staying committed. Sometimes we haven't been able to make good on that, because we've been told we're ending this endeavor. But when we can, that's the value Special Forces NCOs really bring because of their training, the kind of guys they are. That's a super important point.
So as you're saying that, even though it's a little bit later on in your book, but I want to jump forward to, there was the part where you're standing there talking with a guy, and he is a commander, and both of you need to come back to that one. Hang on one second. I'm trying to think. This wasn't the Sons of Iraq, which the Sons of Iraq I'd never heard of, so I want to ask you about that. But there's a point where you're talking with this guy, and previous to this moment, you were able to work out with them a deal. But now the rule is surrender or die.
Yeah.
And at that moment, like, this is a heartbreaking moment, like in this story, where you're sitting there face to face with this, or, you're sitting
on
there
the telephone,
on the telephone with the guy, not face to face. And it just sinks into you. And the way that you detail that, though, is masterful, because it really, I resonated with both of you on both sides of that phone, understanding how other people, right? We always talk about generals in Washington are making calls that cause young soldiers to die on the battlefield.
Potentially my saddest story, and the story that sticks with me the most as the thing I regret. So, as I said, we've been working for a long time trying to broker this deal. Now, the United States has been pushing a surrender message. We've been pushing a slightly different message of capitulation, meaning come to our side. And it's legally different. If you surrender, you're out of the military. I have to demobilize you. You can't go back into the fight. If you capitulate legally, I can actually turn your unit around and you can join my side. And this was the offer we had now been making to them of, hey, if you're an Iraqi general, Iraqi colonel, and you have 3,000 soldiers, I want you to still be an Iraqi colonel tomorrow in the new Iraqi army. This is an appealing offer. Like, and these, a lot of these military professionals, I would assume, are starting to buy into this as, hey, there is a future for me. The U.S. military had overcompensated to some degree from my previous message that said, hey, the way you said surrender was goofy. So now they've kind of come over the top that it's surrender or die. And, somebody could blame this. Well, you told us to say it that way. I'm like, yeah, but not right now, because I've been working on, I want you to come to my side. And we've been doing this through a lot of phone calls, and that sort of thing. And now this message comes down that no, all those offers are off the table. It's surrender or die. And I was really frustrating for me, because I did convey through my channels that I'm like, hey, the guys I'm talking to, it's long distance. Like, I don't have them at gunpoint. So surrender or die is a really weird, hollow threat. And I was talking to one particular guy. I was doing it through my I don't like calling him my interpreter, because he's almost more like my, he's not a bodyguard either. He was my bodyguard, but like, he's like my guy that's there to help me out all the time, And we're on the phone and we're talking, and the guy said something like, how can we make this go through? And I just found out it's off the table. We can't do this. And I said to him, I'm terribly sorry, but this offer, and I think it was hard for me to even explain it. That I'm like, I know I just called you an hour ago and said, I want you to do this. Now you're like, we're ready. And I have to tell you, it's too late. I can't. And he said to me, do you understand what this means? And I said, I think I do. And I said something to the effect of, and I am sorry about that. And it was what you're alluding to. Even now, it still gets to me. It was a very legitimate personal moment between two professionals that I said, I understand what this means. And then he said, the next time we meet, it will not be as friends. And that wasn't he didn't say it in a threatening way. And I said, I understand. And I don't know if he said it or I said it, but one of us said, and I regret that. And then, as I say in the book, he said, Salam alaikum. And I said, alaikum al-assalam. And our phone call ended. And I was devastated, but I was like, what did we just do?
And that has to be heartbreaking for many reasons. And this is where I just want to kind of think outside the box here. I know you don't have the numbers, but how many Iraqis do you think we turned into insurgents that
thousands,
day?
Thousands.
Because that's the sense I left. When I read that section, I immediately thought, these are the guys we had to kill afterwards.
The most effective insurgency we've ever created is that one against us. Because it goes back to what I said. Our mindset was binary. They will surrender, they will not. We didn't think of, what if they just run? What if they just disappear? And we also didn't have we were too naive to realize like they all have family. They all have ties. They have ties into Syria. So they all took their uniforms off and just disappeared until a new opportunity arose. And I would argue, I'm speculating, the bulk of the professional military, and going back to the guy I was talking to, the original plan would be you come to our side and you will then help me find the 10% that doesn't want to come over. And for the most part, they were all like, understand, those guys are crazy. I mean, like, and they're speaking of like the elites, like, oh, that's the Fedayeen, that's the Republican Guard. These are like regular professional officers. Like, those guys are nuts. I will help you find them. And I go back, if we had enlisted these guys to our side, you can't understand the value of, I can have 100 ISR birds overhead. It makes no difference. If I got an Iraqi here, and I've got 10,000 stupid stories like this, he'll be like, that guy's accent's not from here, and be like, what do you mean? Or he'll be like, his beard, nobody wears a beard like that here. And like, I could never develop that kind of.
Like you guys were in cars and they could tell that you guys weren't just regular people.
There's a I can't remember the name of it, but the Russell Crowe movie about spies in Baghdad with Leonardo DiCaprio. Leonardo DiCaprio,
I know what you're talking about.
It's a pretty good movie. And Leonardo DiCaprio is supposed to be a CIA officer, and he's running around dressed in indigenous clothes, and he walks up to these terrorists, and he speaks fluent Arabic, and it's lost on a lot of people. The guys, they were burning CDs, and the guys look at him and they say, "Where are you from, my brother?" And he says, "Rusafa." Rusafa is a neighborhood in Baghdad, and it's such a great scene because he goes Rusafa, which is the right answer, and they're like, and they take off running because they're like, "You're not from Rusafa because your accent's wrong." Yeah. That's what indigenous forces can do that we will never be able to do. And that's the greatest flaw of our counterinsurgency efforts, that we didn't figure out how to bring true regional expertise from our indigenous partners. And we tried to do it alone for the first, year or two. Those guys went, we'd say went to ground, like whether they went to Anbar province and hid, or they went to Syria and hid. I'm going to speculate and say this. I don't think their intention was to come back and fight. I think then the environment, much like a medical scenario, if I opened up your chest, like you're prone to infection, now all these crazy foreign fighters are flowing into the country for jihad. And they're the ones who really changed the nature of the fight into something totally different. Like whether it was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, mostly Al-Qaeda in Iraq, were the problem in our areas. Jaish al-Mahdi was the Shia variant in the south. But we allowed those radical entities to come in. It wasn't the professional military that went away. So I think then they developed an alliance of convenience where you had like, okay, let's go get our country back from the occupiers. But eventually the fanatical elements overtook the resistance movements and pushed any of the regular exiled military out. And it became very radical insurgencies that we were dealing with by 2005, 2007.
And with those groups, this is the other thing, like you said, they weren't necessarily like hardened fighters that just wanted to kill Americans. They were in this terrible position where they used to be Iraqi military, but now they're in this radical group. And the part of that most people don't understand is it's like you're either with us or you're going to die now. And this is the part that most people don't understand that weren't in the war. To the Iraqis, to any of these insurgents, to the terrorists, killing their own that are unloyal or disloyal or in any way going to be that infection that could ruin their organization is more of a threat to them than we are. Yeah. So they will deal with them way more harshly. Those are the ones that are getting set on fire with tires around them.
Iraqis, this is the special forces guy in me. Like I find cultures interesting. I'm intellectually curious about this kind of stuff. Iraqis are really, I think they're great people. I think it's a really interesting culture. And by comparison, the same way I would say it like with West Virginia, they're a little bit reluctant about outsiders, more so than some of their neighbor countries are. And so when these foreign fighters come in and it's freaking us out, much of the population does not care for these foreign fighters either. They have a disdain for them as, you're not Iraqis either, And as an example that is really, really cool. So like I mentioned the ICTF and the commandos and all that kind of stuff. The way those things happened, it's a question that sometimes I get asked, who made the decision to make them? Nobody. Like literally, it's a handful of SF guys were hanging around, in this weird period, like the invasion has stopped, but it's not quite counterinsurgency yet. So like, we're not really sure what we're doing. And truly, some of these guys are friends of mine. They're just like hanging around and they do what SF guys do. And they're like, hey, you guys want to shoot? And they start to, no, I'm serious. And they start to like make friends with the local males. And maybe we made friends because you bring me eggs and milk and stuff and I pay you. And, you know, maybe you were reluctant because I'm an American, but when I started paying you for milk and eggs, you're like, they're not that bad of guys. Mm-hmm. So we've been doing this for like a month. You know, you're making decent money. So now you're like, hey, you guys are actually a lot like us. And it sounds crazy to say it that way, but like over time now, it's like, hey, would you guys like to learn how to shoot? And we start shooting, and suddenly there's this rapport building. And suddenly a guy says, well, I used to be in the Iraqi army. And, you know, fast forward 6 months later, much of these special forces units that are still in country all have like 50 Iraqis they've befriended. You know, and these are the guys who migrated to us because they want a new future for Iraq, whatever. And you're starting to realize everybody in Iraq is not crazy. There are people just like us. And then we start to formally train those guys. Fast forward a year, like when General Petraeus came into country and the training efforts were not going well. Like, you know, the videos we talked about, like we see guys who can't do jumping jacks, whatever. He sort of sees our counterparts and is like, who are those guys? I'm like, oh, that's the ICTF that we made. And suddenly the coalition efforts embrace that as that's the model we're going to go after.
Winning hearts and minds.
But so making a point, we started to integrate partners almost from the get-go. And that makes a huge difference for us because again, and this is like, here's the secret sauce, how this works. How could you possibly, as a special forces team, how could you possibly survive living in a house in a city? To me, that seems like there's no way you would survive. And that's a true statement. You wouldn't. Unless the local community wanted you to survive. Now, like, let this sink in for a second, because this is the secret sauce. No one is doing anything in this neighborhood without the neighborhood knowing it. So if they don't like you, you're going to get killed. Mm-hmm. If they like you, they're going to warn you that people are coming to kill you tomorrow. And I mean, it's as simple as, why would they warn you? Well, maybe the guy likes getting paid for eggs and milk. Like he gets $5 a week from me, and that's more than he was getting before we were here. And they will hint to me like, you should be careful tomorrow at around noon. Like that, there's 100 examples, there's thousands of examples like that, where we've fostered relationships with 25 people in a neighborhood like that. And we get warnings all the time that tonight's going to be a bad night for you guys. And we're like, okay, that's how a special forces team survives. Like, because we know it's not about more fencing and security and all this ISR. It's up to the locals. They will decide if we're going to die or not. So it's up to us to build what we would consider what we call our outer security ring of no one's getting past those folks. They got to go through those folks to get to us, and they're going to warn us. And there's all sorts of really cool stories how I've heard examples of locals warning us like that. There was an example where, so now I go back to the commandos, ICTF, ISWATs. We are legitimate with these guys. We don't treat them like, you know, replacements for American troops. Like we don't care. We legitimately care about them. We have a real bond with them. An Iraqi soldier was killed. So as was the practice, we're now going to take his body home to his family. They get, just because they get a salary like everybody else, and they do get death benefits. It's not much, but it's something. Like that's the contract their son signed. So they go to this guy's house. The family's distraught, as you would expect. The guys are distraught too. You know, and some of the guys, like for listeners that might be surprised to hear this, like it's one of the most emotional events I've ever experienced to see a handful of Green Berets crying. You know, but it happens. So we're at this person's house, or they're at this person's house. They're describing how the son died. The father asks, you know, did my son die bravely? Which he did. Actually, he was actually saving some of the Iraqis and the Americans. So they explained that your son was really a hero and he was a very brave fighter. And like the guys saying this to the father, they're crying. Like you can see they're broken up. So the father excuses himself for a second, goes in the back room, comes back a minute later. He's carrying an Iraqi uniform. He's an Iraqi former general. And he says, I want to turn myself in. I'm surrendering. To which we're like, what do you mean? And he's like, I am General, and I'm making up the name, I am General Khalid of the 3rd Division. We're like, okay, we don't have a warrant for your arrest or anything. But he was of the impression that like anybody in the Iraqi military would be thrown in jail. Mm-hmm. But this guy is surrendering to us because he thinks these are honorable men that worked with his son. So now they tell him, sir, there is no issue between us. You are not someone we're looking for. We were only looking for Saddam's layer, the what we called the baseball cards at that time. So now that this guy is like, oh, how can I help you? No, it's serious. And now, like, think about this.
Yeah.
He's like, my son trusted you. You trusted my son. I am with you. And so we're like, okay, yes. What can you tell us? And they like literally, he's like, okay, do you have a map? We're like, yeah. The men in this house, they are bad.
Yeah.
I know them. You're like, how do you know them? Because they're my former men. You know, like, and you're like, okay, I think this is credible. And, you know, now imagine 40 teams like this spread around the country. That's where our success comes from. And I mean, that story always stuck with me because that demonstrates the true nature of our personal relationships. Again, these are not transactional where we're, we get the locals to do things that are to our benefit. Like, we're right there with them. We're doing this because we believe in it. We have common objectives.
And this is, I think, that point specifically where that outer ring of security is so important because most people think, you said ISR.
Yeah.
Some people might not know. So the drones, right, that are flying overhead, the MQ-9 Reaper, which was my last podcast I put out, was with a Reaper pilot. Like, that didn't exist back then. You guys didn't have Reapers flying overhead. Back then, you guys had Predators just giving you feed. I know because
I'm going to say something snarky very deliberately. Mm-hmm. No, we didn't have ISR because if we had an ISR bird, then task force would only have 10.
Exactly.
Like that's, I'm sorry, but there's no other way to say it. Like, they would only have 7 backups. Like, yeah, that makes sense. A fair point.
Yeah, exactly. But it's so important that the intelligence, and this was the point that I think has been made, but I want to drive home, is instead of needing to kill 10,000 Iraqi soldiers, if you can convince them to give up.
Yeah.
And instead of saying, you seem like the kind of guys that would give up,
right,
and then that hardens them, and then you make this, and then America makes this call, you know, what we're going to do is it's either give up or die, and there's these hard lines that are drawn, and you guys have worked for so long, so hard to build this relationship to get them to come over to you. And as you just described, these soldiers, I think of it for people that maybe watch Game of Thrones, the zombie king is coming and they're fighting. Yeah. And there's so many live people that are coming up. You're like, this battle's going to be over in a second. As they kill them, then they wake up and now they're fighting their own men on this side. And that's what you guys are trying to do. You're trying to flip them instead of needing to attack them and kill them. And that in an insurgency specifically is so crucial.
Two things about that are useful lessons, if you will, for any war. If the United States endeavors to go to war like this, wherever, we should really ask ourselves, is there anyone in the room who sees this plan that's from this country? Because we are prone to
100%
make mistakes, meaning like, I've looked at the map, I think I understand this country. And, you know, I mean, imagine like when, you know, first time you ever went to Afghanistan or Iraq, like how different it is on the ground from, oh gosh, I've stared at a map for a month or 6 months. You know, there's so many examples where if you had brought someone in who was truly indigenous, if not just an expert, and be like, is this going to sound the right way to them? And they'd be like, nah, that's not going to work with them. That's not, that culturally, that doesn't work. Like I've been involved in many plans where, there's nobody who's not a pure American in this room. And that's just not it's not a good idea. The second thing is going back to the psychological operations stuff again, stressing how powerful of a tool this is for both sides. There's examples in the latter part of the book where it was called Operation Yarborough, where I talked about now I'm going to show you, like I told you examples earlier of how we're convincing the Iraqi army your situation is hopeless. And it's not great. It's actually not hopeless, but it's not great. But I'm going to push it a little farther. Now as a counterinsurgent, 4 or 5 years later, I'm going to play the same game. I'm going to convince the insurgents your situation's hopeless. You guys should just give up. And we were very effective doing that against Jaish al-Mahdi in the South. Like I would argue, and I know I talk about it in detail in the book, we literally broke them by lying to them. Like we orchestrated a series of, there's no other way to say it, lies that looked really credible, and we caused panic. And panic is contagious. And like, again, we can try to kill all of them. It's going to take a really long time. Or we can inject them with panic and hopelessness and just let it take off like a virus. And that's literally like the simplest synopsis of how we broke Jaish al-Mahdi, the Shia insurgents. And I love that and I did get to participate in a lot of that one personally. Like we did little stuff, you know, and then we amplified it with a lying campaign that just confused the living hell out of them. For any Psyops that are listening, like, you really should check this out, because it demonstrates, both sides. It's a game of whose lies are gonna convince the other one that you're beaten, you're hopeless.
Mm-hmm. And the YouTube videos that are going kind of going a little viral now, Ghost in the Machine.
Yeah,
those are phenomenal.
They are
marketing ploy or videos for Psyops. And for those people that are unfamiliar, how powerful it is. I think your book, again, everybody should definitely get a copy of this, because you're going to learn so many lessons as these ones that you've detailed. It's not just a running and shoot 'em up. Like a lot of the stories, a lot of, the memoirs, people are just talking about, and I got in this gun battle, and then I shoot these 3 guys and I run over here and I get, I blow up these guys. And it's like, this is really looking at the whole picture, and you get to describe all these different moving parts that you just don't see in a normal memoir.
Thanks for describing it that way, because that's the pitch that I'll make is why I wrote this. This is not the story of me. This is not my memoir where, I'm going to tell you all about me. Like, you get introduced to me in the book, but you know nothing more about me when I get introduced. Like, I tell you, my name is Major Grdovich. I'm the guy who saw the whole story. And I'm a key participant, but I was there from the inception to the planning, the preparation, and the execution. So I can tell the complete story, not just my thread through it that has cool firefights. Mm-hmm. And subsequently, I've been able to weave in lessons. I'll almost say, not in a way that feels like it's an academic lesson. It's in the form of a story, that you now get the reader get to share in, just like as if this was your experience and you took away, that was a bad idea, we shouldn't do it that way. Like, instead of me just saying, here's the list of 10 things you shouldn't do or should do. And I also predominantly wrote it for really 3 reasons. One, as the guy who knew the totality of the story, there's only a couple of us that know the whole story. Like, literally me and now Lieutenant General retired Tova are probably the only 2 guys that knew the whole story. And I felt a responsibility to share it for the military, for the sake of those guys. That it's not about like they didn't get credit, but the military doesn't really know what they did. So I felt a personal responsibility to share that. The second part was to get the benefit to the military or academic audience of, hey, this is a missing piece that if it's been 20 years, in my opinion, we're just at a point, the military, where we can have unemotional conversations about what went well and what didn't go well. We're just there where we can start to academically talk about this. And this is a missing piece of that story. So I felt like that was really, really important. And it is a positive story overall. Like, it's a great story of success for special forces in support of the regular military. And then lastly, I think it's a very entertaining, action-packed story. I hope I captured it that way. I think I did. And I think the population is glad to learn this, because there's plenty of bad stories out there about this went bad, this, everybody died. This is a pretty powerful, exciting story, but it's also pretty, it's a positive story in the end, I would say.
It's a snapshot of history and lessons learned from a firsthand perspective. And I think that's the part that, right to your point, multiple people are going to write different books about their experiences, but you were there for each phase. And that's the part that really sets your book apart and makes it more of a lesson learned, first person narrative history of what happened. These are the things we didn't hear about from our perspective. Right? I was in the Ranger Regiment on the task force, and I didn't know about all these other moving parts. I just know about, we're going after 1 through 10, and we've got birds up, and we've got this, or we don't have this. One of the things that I definitely want to make sure and mention, which going with that full picture, you guys have, you said surrender or die. Okay, what happens after that is you get some used car salesman crackheads who show up in brand new fatigue uniforms straight from the PX wearing FIF on their shoulder. And this is a part where we, I think as Americans, have gotten disgusted with how much the American government can't be, in our eyes, trusted to make these things work, where we've now created a vacuum, and in its place, we've been talked and swindled by these con artists into putting themselves in power. And as you mentioned, people putting their cousins in and all.
Yeah.
That's what I experienced a lot of. Every time I saw some type of corruption, it was nepotism, because these guys that we're putting into power are just taking all the money and then they're just distributing it to themselves. Even in Iraq in 2020, when I was there, we were doing the exact same thing. I'm literally on the ambassador's personal detail. So I'm literally watching driving in these, escorting in these Iraqi generals and the president of Iraq, or the, prime minister, whatever, I forget his title. And we're literally handing him, these pallets and suitcases full of cash. And we know from talking with all these guys that are guards at his facilities, like none of that money moves anywhere except for his cronies.
Another aspect I think is useful for the book for readers, particularly anybody who might be getting into like military or national security type endeavors. It's a snapshot of a complex case. It's not just us and the enemy. There's tons of different players, and it's very, very complicated, as the world always is. And what you alluded to during that time period where the United States is trying to figure out, what Saddam is doing, and it's easy to look back now and be like, oh, it was wrong and the intel, but it was very hard at the time, to tell, is our intelligence correct? Is Saddam defying us? Is he not? Because he was a pretty evil dictator, if you want, but pretty strategically savvy. There's no shortage of con men along the edges looking for opportunities to take advantage. And if the U.S. government is going to be, naive is a fair word, but if we're going to be susceptible to bad advice, and one of the individuals you're talking about, Ahmed Chalabi, he had been a source of information for the CIA for, the better part of a decade. And the CIA learned the hard way, that guy's a liar. He's a con man. And unfortunately, at this time period, Department of Defense and CIA are a little bit butting heads, and the Department of Defense finds this guy called Ahmed Chalabi, and they think he is fantastic, as he says he knows where all the secrets in Iraq are. The CIA literally is telling Department of Defense, that guy's a liar, and the Department of Defense doesn't want to hear it. They're like, our guy's great. And he was literally posturing himself, which he's not Iraqi, by the way, he's Lebanese, but he was posturing himself. Better. Yeah, he was posturing himself for the U.S. to hand him to be the leader of the country. It was crazy. But we had just kind of done it with Karzai in Afghanistan. So this guy's 100% con man. And the Kurds all knew that. They hated him. And I think the regular Iraqis probably did too. So that's the time you're talking about, of suddenly the Pentagon, which is super weird because the Pentagon's not a unit. So why is this guy from the Pentagon in my battle space with, Ahmed Chalabi and some other former State Department guy now turned, literally turned mercenary? And what, I got to say this, because this will resonate with older military folks. He's wearing BDUs, the old camouflage pattern, and some kit. And if anybody's ever worn that stuff, you can tell what it looks like when it's still got the folds in the pockets from where it was on the shelf in the PX, and the pouches have never had magazines in them. It's very, you're smiling because you know what I'm talking about. And this guy's dressed in his camouflage fighting outfit, but it's just not right.
Yeah.
So the thing,
much like the dialect of them,
it's crazy.
The guy, hearing Leonardo DiCaprio saying he's from this neighborhood in Iraq, it's like, bro.
So yeah,
I don't know where you got that kit. So that's not right.
These guys were the entity that was now telling the Pentagon or leading the Pentagon's efforts to put an Iraqi face on this conflict. Just super weird, because I kind of have an Iraqi face with the 60,000 Peshmerga fighters that I've been working with, and they are literally paying Ahmed Chalabi to find volunteers to join their fake manufactured Iraqi force that they called the Free Iraqi Forces, FIF. And it's really weird because everything that I've tried to coordinate and was turned down by the military, these guys got it all. They have ID cards from the U.S. military. They have patches that say FIF, which is super weird. And now the conventional military is being told these guys are the true resistance heroes of Iraq. Don't trust the Kurds. So, unfortunately, bad information, inaccurate, bad start to the next phase of the conflict. But the thing I would offer up any listeners, military folks in the future is, don't take bad performance as a measure of these endeavors are bad. They shouldn't be. Because I know everybody, right now, the current view in the military is, nation building is a bad thing and it was wrong. I'm not going to say that's necessarily not accurate, but don't judge the potential of a concept by bad performance. And what I mean by that is, as you've hinted, what if we did turn massive elements of the Iraqi military to work for us immediately? How would it have gone differently? So like, our endeavor was somewhat noble, maybe naive, but it was still noble. Because like, Saddam was a horrifying dictator that committed genocide. There's no two ways about that.
I know.
And we don't talk about that very much. We talk about the weapons of mass destruction. He did or didn't have, got it. But he committed massive genocide against this population. So he was an evil person. The world is a better place without him. The way we went about it, though, was really weird. Like, we threw our own plan out the window. We had a reconstruction plan that was proposed by the State Department under General Colin Powell that I think made a lot of sense. Because of conflict between Department of State and Department of Defense, we threw that plan out the window at the last minute and instituted an ad hoc plan that was terrible. So again, do we go, hey, these endeavors are wrong, or it's really wrong the way you did it? It didn't make sense. So like, if anybody wants to go forward in complex things like this in the future, my only advice would be is, make sure you have the intellectual depth and acumen to understand what you're really doing and have a plan that when you look at it, it makes sense, and not, it doesn't make sense, but we'll work our way through it. Midway, we'll see what opportunities arise.
Yeah, we're going to jump out of the plane and start repairing shit.
And I say that because it does kind of personally hurt me as a veteran of that time period. We were on a very good trajectory right up till the the middle of 2003, and like I've said it, you may have said it too, like we kind of walked off the field in the fourth quarter of a game that we were winning, and then we're surprised later on how could we be losing, and we're not acknowledging, because you walked off the field. Right. You chose to not finish out your own plan. And I think there would have been a potential to have executed this in a more structured fashion if a couple of events had changed, and we could have solidified the success with the Iraqi population. Because like you and I said, it is a popular myth that, the Iraqis hate us. They did not hate us. They're like normal humans. They welcomed us, but it wasn't free. They welcomed us to see, what are you going to do? Right. And suddenly we're like, well, we're not here for governance. We're not here to provide you. I'm like, well, you just destroyed the guy who I didn't like, but he is the guy that kept the lights running, kept the buses running. Are you going to do the same? And we almost said this, that's not my problem. I'm like, well, then I don't like you either. Like, I'm saying that I'm ready to like the next entity that just provides me the basic services that governance is supposed to provide me.
And it almost feels like, when you just said that, it almost feels like that's how we felt as Americans with the last few elections, where it was like, when I hear regular people, they're like, what are your desires? Leave me alone and let me live my life. Don't crash our government. Don't crash our economy. Just let me live in peace.
There was an event in the South that I find sort of twistedly amusing. The Iranians have been supporting the insurgency in the South against us for years, very effectively, very, very effectively against us, causing us a tremendous amount of problems. They were so effective in their efforts that they were able to then start to transition almost away from fighting to governance, meaning they were investing in, like, they were building roads, they were building power plants. And like, in some places, the roads and the power plants and stuff were actually pretty good. And like, we as the Americans reporting on things noted, like, all of the roads going east into Iran are brand new. And there's power lines going all the way into Iran. And like, I can remember hearing Americans going, and we will not accept that. And I'm like, why? Like, that's the contest. Like, are we offended by their quality of governance? Mm-hmm. Like, I get it. I don't like how we got here, and I don't like the way, they sort of attacked us to get here. But now the things they're doing are not necessarily nefarious, because they've already won over the population. And if you want to do better, then offer a better, legitimate, we're not going to win this by the gun. It's going to be, we offer you something better. And I remember watching the American officers get offended by the good roads and the legitimate power lines. And I'm like, I don't know I feel like we might be off on this one.
I think that drives to a question that I have thought of since I was a kid, watching us take Baghdad in 72 hours. And I thought, okay, well, that's it, right? In all of human history, you conquer the land, you go plant your flag, you win. Time of the game is over. Fourth quarter, the game ends. The buzzer. Okay, now we won, and then we can leave. And we can all just be happy that I won.
It's in the top of one of my chapters. A quote from Genghis Khan. It says something like, "Conquering the world on horseback is easy. Governing it off horseback is the hard part." Yes. And that's again, if somebody wants to take a lesson from that, like, take it seriously. It's as challenging as the conquering part.
And that's the hardest part for us, I think, to rationalize why we see that we pulled out of Afghanistan, and a lot of people just go, okay, well, we lost that war, right? And people are right now like trying to figure out, wait, did we win in Afghanistan or did we lose in Afghanistan? I understand the way we pulled out was an absolute debacle, and horrible and horrific things happened to the people that stayed. And some of those there's people that have started channels since that are all talking about Afghanistan, the people we left behind, and all of that. And I think that we're all just kind of stuck in this, like, I don't know, is this the same as what happened at Vietnam? Because I wasn't alive back then. We didn't technically lose Vietnam. We won every battle, but technically we lost the war because we left. Well, we just left Afghanistan. Does that mean we lost?
I get very sarcastic, like, it's not the same. Vietnam ended on the skid of a helicopter.
Exactly.
This ended on the wheel of a C-17.
Very different vehicles. No, but
but the lessons, the academic lessons, and that's why I go back to, like, if we can get past the emotion of it, like, I was a veteran, I was there. If we can get past the emotion and, like, okay, it's time to start academically analyzing what we did and peeling it apart and be like, that was actually pretty good. That could have been better. That was bad. Let's capture that and not do it again. Or, or do it. Don't repeat the same mistakes. Yeah. Because I personally do feel, if we had as a force really understood some of the lessons of Vietnam, we probably would have avoided some of the missteps that we had to learn the hard way again in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And I think we see these things being played out in more than just the military role. Like, we see defund the police, and then we see everything falling into chaos, and you're just like, no, you need more funding, you need more, more support, you need multiple different things. But we see this not only in overseas wars, we see it at home, and it's like, I think there's so many people out there that have the common sense that are watching these large debacles and these things that are just rolling downhill, and you're like, this is going to crash on all of our heads, and you're just not stopping it. And I think this part of this book, and where you're sitting there just going, we are putting the FIF in charge. We know that he's a con man, and you're just sitting there reading the book going, please, there's somebody at the end that goes, stop that, let's not do that, and you want a happy ending. For readers that do, if someone does actually get it, like, I do offer some good lessons of, we were very successful in the city of Kirkuk. And I'm not going to make it sound like we're so smart. It was almost coincidental, but because I have advice of locals who can tell me things, we almost accidentally found people who knew how to do things. I mean, like, and I think I talked about in the book, we found the guy who knows how to turn the power plant on. Yes.
We found a guy who knows how to run the water facility, to pump water. And like, there was a story, myself and Pat Roberson, who's a character in the book, were talking about this when we were both majors driving around the city, when we got the power turned on, which was a coincidence that we found the guy that knew how to turn the power on. We turned the power on, and I joked that it was like a gigantic cartoony electrical switch. And when we did it, power came on to 75% of the city. And it sounds weird to explain it this way, but when power came back, he and I both said this, you could almost feel like the anxiety in the city, like, just dissipated. Like, it was almost, we must rise up. It is time to, the soccer game is on. Yes. And it makes this point, like, again, are those people different than us or worse than us? Those people are crazy. Like, we say things like that. I'm like, no, they have nothing. So the distance from them, from where they are to let's pick up guns and fight, is a lot shorter than it is for me, because I got a really nice house and I got a really good job and I got lots of stuff. If I had none of that stuff and subsequently there were piles of rifles laying in the street, I might be like, I hate my neighbor. And if you can provide, some stuff, your electricity still works, water still runs, the buses are running, you still have a job, money still works here. There's basic security. Suddenly people are like, I hate my neighbors, let's go watch the game. But, there's not this drive for let's fight, let's attack. I make it sound kind of, childlike the way I'm explaining, but I'm actually really serious. Like, basic governance is 75% of it. If you fill that gap, it inoculates the population to all the crazy propaganda. We must rise up. We must fight. You should hate your neighbors. Let's kill the government. If you have something to lose, you don't want to lose it. If you have nothing to lose, you're like, yeah, let's listen to the crazy guy from outside this country who wants us to rise up.